Clara Whitaker did not weep when they dropped her husband into the ground. She could not afford to. She had 40 miles of Texas hardpan between her and the only door she had left to knock on, and nothing but cracked leather boots and a pouch of dried roots to carry her there. She did not know if the man at Red Mesa Ranch would turn her away. She only knew that if she stopped walking, she would die alone in that heat. And she had not buried everything she loved just to lie down in the dust. If this story moves you, subscribe to this channel and follow Clara all the way to the end. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1874 did not forgive anyone. It had not forgiven the cattle that dropped along the creek beds. It had not forgiven the men who bet their savings on rain that never came. And it had not forgiven Clara Whitaker, who walked the last 6 miles to Red Mesa Ranch with nothing left in her body but stubbornness and thirst. She had started before sunup. By the time the ranch gate came into view, the sun was straight overhead and the air tasted like hot iron. Her lips were cracked so badly she could feel them split when she swallowed. Her dress, gray once, now the color of the road itself, clung to her back. In her right hand, she carried a small bundle tied with cord. In her left, the leather pouch her mother had pressed into her hands the day she left home at 17. Dried yarrow, willow bark, horehound, plantain leaf, a small jar of pine resin wrapped in cloth. She had been carrying that pouch for 13 years. It was the only thing in the world that still smelled like something living. The gate to Red Mesa Ranch was heavy iron set between 2 posts of raw cedar. A man leaned against the right post with his arms crossed and his hat pulled low. He was big, not tall, but built wide through the shoulders, the kind of wide that comes from real work. And he watched Clara approach the way a person watches a stray dog they haven't decided to feed or run off yet. Clara did not slow down. She stopped 6 feet from the gate, set her bundle on the ground, and straightened her spine until she stood as tall as her 5 feet 4 inches allowed. "My name is Clara Whitaker," she said. "I'm looking for work." The man pushed off the post. He looked her over the ruined dress, the cracked lips, the leather pouch, the bundle, and something in his expression settled into the particular flatness of a man who has made up his mind before asking a single question. "This is a cattle ranch, ma'am," he said, "not a laundry." "I know what a cattle ranch is." "Then you know we don't hire women for range work." "I didn't say I was asking for range work." He tilted his head. "What are you asking for?" "Whatever needs doing," Clara said. "Cooking, mending, hauling. I'm not particular, and I'm not weak whatever you're looking at right now and thinking." He almost smiled. Not the kind of smile that means warmth. The kind that means a man has found his answer, and it isn't yes. "Where'd you come from?" "Harrow Creek. Before that, Mineral Wells." "You walk all the way from Harrow Creek?" "I did." He looked at her boots then. She knew what he saw. The left sole was separating from the upper. She had tied it back with a strip of cloth torn from her underskirt 3 days ago. "Husband let you make that walk alone," he said. "My husband is buried in Harrow Creek," Clara said. "He has been for 11 days. That landed. She watched it land. The man's jaw shifted, and he looked away toward the fence line for a moment, the way men do when they've said something they didn't intend to be cruel and realize too late that it was. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. That surprised her. "So am I," she said. "But being sorry doesn't keep a woman fed. I'm asking for honest work for honest wages. I don't expect charity and I won't cause trouble. I know how to cook, I know how to clean, and I know medicine." She touched the leather pouch at her side without thinking about it the way a person touches something they've carried long enough that it's become part of the body. "If you've got sick animals or sick men, I can be useful in ways your ranch hands can't." The man studied the pouch. "What's in that?" "Plants." "Plants. Herbs, roots, things that heal." His expression returned to that settled flatness. "We've got a doctor in town for that." "Then you're a fortunate man," Clara said, "and I hope you never need more than he can offer." Something in her voice not bitter, just honest the way a woman speaks when she has watched medicine fail up close, made him look at her differently for just a moment. Then the moment passed. "I can't help you, ma'am," he said. "I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't help you." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her bundle from the ground, settled the cord across her palm, and said, "Who owns this ranch?" "Mr. Calloway." "Is Mr. Calloway available?" "Mr. Calloway doesn't do his own hiring." "I didn't ask if he does his own hiring," Clara said. "I asked if he was available." A silence stretched between them. The man crossed his arms again. "Caleb." The voice came from behind the gate from somewhere near the house, and it was calm and flat and used to being listened to. "Open it." Caleb, because that was clearly who he was, turned his head, then looked back at Clara, then turned and worked the latch without another word. The man who walked toward her from the direction of the house was not what she expected. She had built a picture in her mind during 40 miles of walking: a fat man, probably, or an old one. The kind of man who owned things and watched other people tend them. What came toward her instead was lean and straight, somewhere in his early 40s, with the weathered face of someone who had spent years doing the very work he now paid others to do. His eyes were a pale gray-green that the Texas sun had bleached nearly colorless. He stopped a few feet from her and looked at her the way the foreman had, but different. Not dismissive, careful, like a man reading ground before he steps on it. "Nathaniel Calloway," he said. He did not offer his hand. "Clara Whitaker." "Caleb says you walked from Harrow Creek." "I did." "That's close to 40 miles. "Yes." "In this heat." "I'm aware of the heat, Mr. Calloway." Something moved across his face. Not quite amusement. "What is it you're looking for, Mrs. Whitaker?" "Work. I told your foreman. I can cook, clean, haul, mend, or tend the sick. I'm not asking for more wages than I earn, and I won't ask for sympathy." "You keep saying that," Nate said. "That you're not asking for sympathy." "Because I'm not." "Then why mention it?" Clara met his eyes. "Because in my experience, Mr. Calloway, the first thing a man sees when a woman shows up alone and poor is someone who wants to be pitied. I want you to see something different." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "And what should I see?" "Someone useful," Clara said. "Or someone you send down the road. Those are the only two things I'm offering you the chance to decide." Behind him, the front door of the ranch house opened. Clara heard it rather than saw it. The soft creak of hinges, the light sound of small feet on a wooden porch. She glanced past Nate's shoulder without meaning to. A child stood on the porch steps. A girl small for what Clara guessed was about 7 years, wearing a white dress that was already wrinkled from the day. Her hair was dark like her father's and pulled back with a ribbon that was coming loose. She stood very still watching. Clara noticed the sound of her breathing before she noticed anything else. Even from that distance, even with the wind off the plane carrying sound away, there was something in the way the child's small chest rose and fell, too shallow, too careful, like a person trying not to cough and not fully winning. She pulled her attention back to Nate. He had noticed her looking. His expression had shifted, not hostile, but guarded, in the way of a man who has learned that the things he loves most are also the things that can be used against him. "That's my daughter," he said. "Grace." "She's lovely," Clara said quietly, and meant it, and said nothing else. Another silence. Nate looked at her, the ruined dress, the leather pouch, the bundle, the boots. He looked at the road behind her, the long nothing of it. Then he looked at Caleb. "Set her up in the back storage room behind the tack shed," he said. "Clean it out. Put a cot in." Caleb's head came around. "Nate," temporarily. Nate said, still looking at Clara. "You work 2 weeks. I pay fair. If it's not working, you move on. No hard feelings either direction." "That's acceptable," Clara said. "You eat with the kitchen staff. You take your orders from Caleb on practical matters and from me on everything else. You don't go past the fence line without telling someone where you're going." "Understood." "And Mrs. Whitaker." He said it with a particular steadiness, the kind that means a line is being drawn. "Whatever's in that pouch, you don't give it to anyone on this ranch without my knowledge. Not a hand, not a horse, not my daughter. Are we clear?" Clara held his gaze. "Clear." He nodded. once turned, and walked back toward the house without looking back. Caleb stared at her. He was a man somewhere between suspicion and reluctant duty, and he wore both badly. "Don't get comfortable," he said. "I'll try not to," Clara said. The storage room behind the tack shed was exactly what its name said. It was a room for storing things, not people. It held 3 broken saddles, a bin of rusted tools, and a summer's worth of heat that had been collecting since April with nowhere to go. When Caleb pushed the door open, the air that came out was like opening an oven. He didn't apologize for it. He just dropped a cot frame against the wall and said a ranch hand would bring a mattress tick before dark. "There's a pump out back," he said. "You use it before the men do in the morning, nobody'll give you trouble. You use it after some might. That's your business to manage." "I'll manage it," Clara said. He looked at the leather pouch again. "That medicine of yours," he said. "You actually know what you're doing, or is it something your grandma told you and you never questioned?" Clara set her bundle on the floor. "My grandmother lived to 89, she said, and she buried 3 doctors who thought they knew better than her. I've been studying plants since I could walk, and I've spent the last 10 years putting what I know to use on people who couldn't afford Dr. Bell's fees." She met his eyes. "So yes, Mr. Rusk. I know what I'm doing." He chewed on that. "How'd you know my last name?" "You introduced yourself to a traveler on the road 2 miles back. He mentioned the ranch and the foreman. I listened." Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. Then he turned and left without another word. Clara stood in the heat of the storage room for a moment. Then she sat down on the floor, put her back against the wall, and pressed her face into her hands. She allowed herself 60 seconds. That was what she had given herself after the burial too, 60 seconds behind the church while the men shoveled dirt. 60 seconds to feel the full weight of everything before she put it somewhere deep and locked the door. Her husband had been a good man. Not a remarkable man, but good. He had never raised his hand to her. He had tried to build something. When the fever took him, he had been holding her hand and trying to make a joke, which was very like him. She breathed through the 60 seconds. Then she stood up, wiped her face with the back of her wrist, and began clearing saddles. She had been at Red Mesa Ranch for 4 days before Grace spoke to her. It happened the way things happen when you are not trying to force them sideways, quiet, almost accidental. Clara was sitting on the back step of the kitchen house in the early evening, mending a tear in her second dress with a needle she'd borrowed from the cook. A heavy-set woman named Ada, who had taken one look at Clara on the first morning, asked no questions, and simply put a plate of biscuits in front of her. Grace came around this corner of the house with a cloth doll tucked under her arm. She stopped when she saw Clara. Clara looked up, then went back to her mending. A long pause. Clara stitched. "That's a bad tear," Grace said finally. Her voice was soft and a little rough, like she was fighting down a tickle in her throat. "Yes," Clara agreed. "But it'll hold." Another pause. Grace took a few steps closer and looked at the doll she was carrying, turning it in her hands. One of the doll's cloth arms was hanging by a thread. Clara kept her eyes on her own work and said nothing. "Mine's broken too," Grace said. "I see that. Papa said he'd fix it, but he forgot." She said it without blame, just fact, the way children report things they've long since made peace with. Clara set down her own mending. "May I look?" Grace held out the doll. Clara took it and examined the torn seam at the shoulder. It was simple enough, a few stitches pulled loose. She threaded the needle again and began to work. Grace sat down on the step beside her without being invited. She watched Clara's hands. "Do you know about plants?" Grace asked. Clara looked at her. "I do." "Who told you that?" "Tom Hensley told Hector Mays you had a pouch full of witch stuff." Grace considered this with complete seriousness. "I don't think it's witch stuff, though. Witches don't fix dolls." "That's sound reasoning," Clara said. "What do the plants do?" "Different ones do different things. Some lower fever, some stop bleeding, some help people breathe easier when their chest is tight." Grace was quiet. Clara handed the doll back. The arm was sound now, the seam tight. Grace looked at it, looked at Clara, then pressed the doll to her chest and said, "Thank you, ma'am." "You're welcome." Grace didn't leave right away. She sat on the step a moment longer, and Clara could hear it again, that careful, shallow breathing. Too measured for a child her age. The kind of breathing that belongs to someone who has learned at 7 years old to take up as little air as possible so nobody notices when it hurts. Clara kept her face still. "What's your favorite plant?" Grace asked. "Yarrow," Clara said. "It grows in dry places and still blooms yellow. I think there's something to admire in that." Grace nodded solemnly, as though filing the information away. Then she stood, tucked the doll under her arm, and walked back toward the house. It was on the 6th day that things changed. Tommy Doyle came back from the south pasture on the back of another man's horse, barely sitting upright, his left arm wrapped in a cloth that had gone dark with blood, and something worse. He had gone down hard off a cutting horse during a drive, and the gash along his forearm had been roughly bandaged and left for 2 days while the work got finished because there wasn't another choice. By the time he was on the porch of the bunkhouse, his arm had swelled thick to the elbow, and the skin around the wound had gone the yellow red of a bruise that has decided to become something more serious. Dr. Bell came out from town the following morning. He was a trim man with good boots and a precise way of moving that announced his education before he opened his mouth. He looked at Tommy's arm, cleaned the surface of the wound with carbolic, wrapped it in fresh bandage, and said the fever would break in a day or two, and the men were to keep the arm elevated and give Tommy whiskey for the pain. He charged $3 and left by noon. By nightfall, Tommy's temperature had climbed past reason. He was shaking so hard, his teeth rattled, calling out for someone named Catherine, who 2 of the men said quietly was his mother and had been dead since the war. Clara heard it from the storage room. She sat on her cot in the dark and listened and did not move because Nate Calloway had told her plainly that she was not to give anything to anyone without his knowledge. And because she understood in the way a woman understands things when she has spent her life being the kind of person rooms empty around. That if she walked into that bunkhouse uninvited and Tommy Doyle died anyway, she would be the reason regardless of what Dr. Bell had or hadn't done. So she waited. Just before 10 o'clock, Caleb knocked on her door. He didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands, which was not something she had seen him do before. "How bad is he?" Clara asked. "Bad," Caleb said. "Fever won't come down. He can't keep water." "The wound is infected deep," Clara said. "Not just surface. The bandage sealed it without cleaning below." Caleb's jaw worked. "Can you do something?" "I can try." Mr. Calloway said. "I know what Mr. Calloway said," Clara said. She stood up and reached for the leather pouch. "Does Mr. Calloway know you're here?" Caleb was quiet. "Go get him," Clara said. "I won't touch Tommy Doyle without his say, but go get him now because we don't have until morning." Caleb went. He came back with Nate 4 minutes later. Nate came through the door of the storage room and looked at Clara standing there with the leather pouch open on the cot, sorting through small cloth packets by feel in the lamplight. "Caleb says you think you can help him," Nate said. "I think I can try to help him," Clara said. "I won't promise more than that. Dr. Bell cleaned the surface and sealed the heat in. The infection is below the wound. It needs to come out before it spreads higher." She held up a small packet. "Plantain poultice draws infection. Willow bark tea for the fever. I need clean water hot, as you can get it clean cloth and a knife that's been held over flame." Nate looked at the pouch, looked at her. If he dies, it won't be because I tried to help him," Clara said quietly. "It might be because we waited too long, but I won't stand here and argue the odds with you while his fever climbs. You decide, right now." Something moved through Nate Calloway's face. Not surrender, not trust exactly, but the look of a man who has run out of other options and knows it and hates it. "Do it," he said. "I'm sure at age." Clara worked through the night. She did not let anyone stand close enough to second-guess her hands. Caleb stood near the door and watched with his arms crossed and his face unreadable. Two of the ranch hands hovered outside the bunkhouse window until she told Nate they needed to move, or she needed them to find her more hot water, and either way, they needed to stop breathing in her ear. Nate almost smiled at that. He didn't. Tommy Doyle fought the poultice, at first twisting and muttering and trying to push her hands away with the weak, uncoordinated strength of a man who is fighting something he can't see. Clara talked to him the entire time, not comforting nonsense real words, his name, where he was, what she was doing, and why, because she had learned from her mother that a person in fever is not gone, just lost, and sometimes a voice saying the right true things can reach them. "Tommy," she said, cleaning the wound carefully, hearing him hiss in pain. "Tommy Doyle, you listen to me. My name is Clara, and I'm helping you. The pain means it's working. Stay with me." "Catherine," he murmured. "I'm not Catherine," she said. "But Catherine would want you to stay still and let me work, wouldn't she?" He was quiet after that. Near 3 a.m, Nate brought her coffee without being asked. He set it on the stool beside her and stood back. She did not look up. "How is he?" Nate asked. "Fever's still high," Clara said. "But the swelling's moving. That's better than it staying in one place." "Is that good?" "It means the infection has somewhere to go." "Yes, it's better." Nate was quiet for a moment. "You've done this before." "Many times." "For who?" Clara looked up at him, then briefly, before going back to work. "For people who didn't have $3 for Dr. Bell." Nate said nothing. He picked up his coffee he'd brought, 2 cups, and sat down on the empty bunk across from Tommy's and watched her work. He did not leave until nearly dawn. Neither did she. When Tommy Doyle's fever broke just before sunrise, it broke hard and fast and real, the sweat pouring off him, his breathing evening out, his eyes clearing. He looked at Clara with the blinking confusion of a man who has been somewhere very dark and suddenly found himself back in a room with lamplight and people. "You're going to be all right," Clara told him. "Drink some water, slowly." Tommy drank. Then he looked at her. "Who are you?" "Clara Whitaker. I work here." "You're the woman with the plants," he said. His voice was rough but clear. "That's right." He was quiet a moment. Then, "Thank you, ma'am." Clara nodded once and began cleaning up. Behind her, she heard Nate rise from the bunk. She heard him walk to the door. Then he stopped. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said. She looked back over her shoulder. Nate Calloway stood in the doorway with the early light just beginning behind him, and something in his face had shifted from the careful blankness of the first day into something she couldn't quite read yet. He held his hat in both hands, the way Caleb had, which she had already learned meant something on this ranch. "Breakfast is in an hour," he said. "You should eat with everyone today." He put his hat back on and walked out into the morning. Clara stood in the cooling bunkhouse with Tommy sleeping sound behind her, and she pressed her hand once against the leather pouch at her side. She was not safe yet. She knew that. She had not earned a place here. She had earned a morning and a plate of food and a man's grudging, careful, complicated acknowledgement that she had done something real. But she had learned long ago that sometimes that was enough to stand on. For now. The morning after Tommy Doyle's fever broke, Clara ate breakfast at the long kitchen table for the first time. She sat at the far end, away from the men, and kept her eyes on her plate. Ada set a bowl of cornmeal porridge in front of her and a cup of black coffee, and said nothing, which Clara had already decided she appreciated more than most conversation. The ranch hands filed in from the bunkhouse, in ones and twos, loud and dusty. Even at that hour, and one by one, they noticed her sitting there, and the table got a little quieter each time. Not silent, just careful. A young hand named Hector Mays sat down across from her without looking directly at her, and said to the man beside him loudly enough for the whole table, "Word is the widow woman worked some kind of root magic on Tommy last night." "Word is Tommy almost lost that arm," said the man beside him, which was a ranch hand named Pete Greer, older with a gray mustache and the flat eyes of someone who had seen enough not to be impressed by gossip. "Same word," Hector said. Same night, Pete said. You decide which part matters. Hector chewed on that along with his biscuit and didn't say anything else. Clara drank her coffee and did not look up. After breakfast, Caleb found her at the pump. He stood with his thumbs in his belt and watched her wash her hands with the particular patience of a man who has something to say and hasn't figured out how to say it yet. Tommy wants to see you, he said finally. I'll go after I finish the morning wash. He wants to thank you proper. He already thanked me, Clara said. Last night. He was half out of his head last night. The thanks still counted. Caleb was quiet for a moment. You didn't have to work through the night like that, he said. The words came out stiff like they'd been rehearsed and still hadn't come out the way he meant. Most people wouldn't have. Clara dried her hands on her apron. Most people don't know what I know, she said. It wouldn't be right to have the knowledge and not use it. Caleb looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, more like a loosening of a grip he'd been holding tight since the gate. Where'd you learn it? He said. The medicine. My mother, Clara said, and her mother before that, and years of watching what worked and what didn't on people who had nothing else to try. He nodded slowly. Dr. Bell's not going to like it, he said. He was already told this morning what happened. Clara looked at him. Who told him? One of the hands rode in for supplies at first light, talked. Caleb shrugged. Small towns? Clara was quiet. She had known this was coming the way you know a storm is coming when the air pressure changes, not because you can see the clouds yet, but because something in your body remembers what that feeling means. What did Mr. Calloway say when he heard? She asked. Nothing, Caleb said, which with Nate means he's thinking. She found out what he was thinking that afternoon. Nate came to the kitchen house while she was helping Ada peel potatoes, not because she had been asked to, but because Ada's hands had gone stiff in the heat, and Clara had seen it and simply taken up the knife without comment. Nate came in, looked at the two of them, looked at the pile of peeled potatoes and said, Mrs. Whitaker, a word. He led her out to the side yard away from the kitchen window. He stood with his arms crossed and his hat shading his face and said, Bell is saying you practiced medicine without license or authority. Bell is saying that because Tommy Doyle is alive, Clara said. Nate's jaw tightened. That's not the point. What is the point, Mr. Calloway? The point, he said carefully, is that I have a ranch to run in a county where Dr. Bell has the sheriff's ear and the church board's trust and more credit at the bank than I want to argue with. The point is that I gave you permission to help one injured man, and that permission is now being used by Bell to call this entire property a place where unlicensed medicine is practiced on workers. Clara set her jaw. What would you like me to say? I'd like you to understand the position you've put me in. I kept your man alive, Clara said. That's the position I put you in. The words landed harder than she intended. She saw it cross his face, a flash of something not anger, but the particular tension of a man who knows he is wrong and hasn't fully made peace with it yet. I know that, Nate said. His voice dropped half a register. I know that, Mrs. Whitaker. I was there. I watched you work. He uncrossed his arms and looked at the fence line. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? He looked back at her. It's about the fact that I can't protect you if Bell decides to push this further. And I need to know if there's going to be more situations like last night. I can't promise there won't be, Clara said honestly. People get sick and hurt. That's the nature of a working ranch. Then I need you to come to me first, every time, before you touch anyone. I did come to you, she said. Last night, I sent Caleb. I mean, before it gets to that point. Clara looked at him for a long moment. You want me to ask permission to use knowledge I spent 20 years learning on people who are suffering. I want you to let me do my job, Nate said, which is managing what happens on this land. Yes, that's what I want. It was not fair. They both knew it, and they both knew just as clearly that fairness was not a currency that spent well on the Texas frontier. All right, Clara said, "but I want something in return." Nate raised an eyebrow. He had not expected that. "I want a proper room," she said. "Not the storage shed. Something with a window that opens. And I want the men told by you, not by Caleb, by you, that what I do is work, not witchcraft, and that any man on this ranch who can't treat me with basic decency can take that up with his foreman." A silence hung between them. Then Nate said, "The room by the east end of the main house has a window." "Thank you," Clara said. He nodded and turned to go, then stopped. Without turning back, he said, "For what it's worth, what you did for Tommy. I don't have a word for it except right. It was the right thing." He walked away before she could answer. Clara stood in the side yard with the heat pressing down on her shoulders and let out a breath she had been holding since the conversation started. The room had a window. It wasn't much, but it was something real on solid ground, and she had learned not to dismiss solid ground when she found it. Odd. The room by the east end of the main house was small and plainly furnished: a cot, a washstand, a single wooden chair. But it had a window that faced east, which meant it caught the morning air before the heat became serious. More importantly, it had a door that locked from inside. Clara had not slept in a room with a door that locked in 11 weeks. She moved her things in that evening. All of them fit in one trip. Hector Mays watched from the bunkhouse doorway and said something to the man behind him that Clara did not hear and did not try to. Pete Greer was sitting on the bunkhouse step, and when Clara passed, he gave her a short nod, the kind a man gives when he has decided to acknowledge someone exists without making a speech about it. She nodded back. That night, she heard Grace coughing from somewhere inside the main house. It was a small sound muffled by walls and distance, the kind of cough a person does quietly so no one worries. Clara lay on her cot and listened. One cough, then silence. Then another, then silence again. Then nothing for a long while. She closed her eyes. In the morning, she told herself. In the morning, she would find a reason to be near the child, and she would listen properly, and she would decide what she thought she was hearing. The next week moved in the particular rhythm of hard work and small tensions. Clara cooked alongside Ada 4 mornings out of 7, cleaned the main house on the alternating days, hauled water before the men were up, and mended whatever was put in front of her without complaint. She was not performing goodwill. She was simply doing work that needed doing, which was what she had said she would do, and she did not see any reason to be halfway about it. The ranch hands were divided about her in roughly the way she had expected. Pete Greer and 2 older hands had decided she was fine, and said so by simply treating her normally, which was the only endorsement that mattered. Hector Mays had not decided yet, and made his indecision known through sideways looks and comments delivered at volume to other people. 2 or 3 of the newer hands simply avoided her, which she found easier than the ones who stared. Tommy Doyle came to find her on the 3rd day after his fever broke. Walking slow, but walking right, and he stood in the kitchen doorway with his hat in both hands and said, "Ma'am, I know I said it when I wasn't all the way right in my head, so I'm saying it again when I am. Thank you. I got a wife in San Antonio and 3 kids under 6. I would have left them without a father." Clara set down her rolling pin. "Does your wife know how to read?" she said. Tommy blinked. "She does. Good. Write to her tonight and tell her to keep yarrow and willow bark in the house. The yarrow is a yellow flower, grows dry ground. The willow bark comes off any willow tree near water. If a fever starts in one of those children, steep the bark and give it in small cups. Don't wait." Tommy looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "You just gave me something for my whole family." "I gave you information," Clara said. "Information's free." He left with his hat still in both hands, and she went back to the rolling pin. That evening, she noticed Nate standing in the kitchen doorway at the end of a long conversation between Tommy and 2 other ranch hands. He had a mug of coffee, and he was not pretending not to listen. When he saw her notice him, he looked away, which was enough of an answer about how long he had been there. So, the thing with Grace began the way most important things begin, quietly sideways without announcement. Clara had taken to walking the near side of the creek in the early morning before the heat settled in for its daily punishment. She went ostensibly to check the creek bank for the plants she needed to replenish, and her pouch willow plantain yarrow did grow there, all three, which was part of why she had started the walks, but not all of it. The other part was that walking was the only time nobody needed anything from her, and a body needs at least 1 hour in a day when it belongs to itself. On the fourth morning, Grace was sitting on the flat rock above the creek bend. She sat with her knees up and her skirt tucked around her ankles, and a small stick in her hand that she was using to draw patterns in the mud at the rock's edge. She did not look surprised to see Clara. She looked like someone who had been waiting, but did not want to admit it. Clara sat down on the bank nearby, not too close. "What are you drawing?" Clara asked. "Nothing," Grace said. Then, "A map." "Of what?" "Places I've been in my head." She looked at the mud patterns. "I read about places in books, and then I go there in my head. Then I draw the map." "That's a fine way to travel," Clara said. Grace looked at her seriously. "Have you been to real places?" "Some. Mineral wells. San Antonio. 3 days in New Orleans once when I was young." Grace's eyes went wide. "New Orleans." "New Orleans," Clara confirmed. "What was it like?" "Loud," Clara said. "Flowers everywhere, even in winter. Music from every window. Food that would make you want to sit down and cry from happiness." Grace considered this with deep solemnity. "I've never been anywhere." "You've been here," Clara said. "And here is somewhere." Grace looked at the creek. "Papa says when I'm stronger, I can go to Santa Fe." She paused. "He says that a lot." Clara heard the weight in it, the way a child learns to hold a promise gently so it doesn't crack if it's late. She kept her voice even. "Do you get sick often?" "More in summer," Grace said, and said it like a person reporting a fact they've long since stopped being surprised by. "Dr. Bell says it's a weak constitution. He says some children are born with it." "Does it hurt?" Clara asked. "When you cough," Grace looked at her. It was a direct look, the kind children give when they're deciding whether an adult can be trusted with the truth. "Yes," she said. "Like something pressing from inside." Clara nodded, said nothing. "Papa doesn't know it hurts," Grace said. "I don't tell him because he gets a bad face when he's scared." "A bad face," Clara repeated. "Like he's very still and very far away at the same time," Grace said. "He looks like that when he thinks about Mama." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your mother, how long has she been gone?" 3 years, Grace said. "I was 4. I don't remember her face right, only her voice." She looked at the mud map. "Papa remembers everything. That's why he has the face." The morning moved around them, the creek sound and the early insects and the heat already building at the edges of things. Clara reached into her herb pouch and drew out a small sprig of dried horehound. "Smell this," she said, and held it out. Grace leaned forward and sniffed. She blinked. "It's bitter." "Yes. But if I made it into a tea with a little honey, it would taste almost good, and it would help with the pressing feeling." Grace looked at the sprig. "You're not allowed to give me anything," she said. "Papa told you." Clara felt something in her chest pull tight. Not offense, but admiration, the particular kind reserved for children who pay attention. "That's right," she said. "He did. So I'm not giving it to you. I'm just telling you what it does, so you know." Grace considered this. Then, "Would you tell Papa?" "If he asked me, yes," Clara said. "I'd tell him everything I told you." Grace nodded slowly, like she was processing a problem with many sides. Then she tucked her stick into her dress pocket and stood up. "I'm going in for breakfast," she said. "Ada makes better biscuits on Wednesdays." "That's important information," Clara said. Grace almost smiled. Then she turned and walked back toward the house, and Clara listened to her footsteps, and then under the footsteps, quiet and persistent, as a leak through a roof, the sound of the child's breathing. Careful, shallow, holding itself back. The afternoon the town gossip arrived was a Tuesday. Her name was Margaret Alcott. the wife of the feed and grain merchant, a thin woman with quick eyes, and a way of arriving at a ranch house with a covered dish and leaving with an entire season's worth of other people's business. She came with a pie and a neighbor woman named Ruth Henshaw, and Ada let them into the kitchen the way you let weather in, because it's already here and there's nothing for it. Clara was in the side yard when she heard Margaret Alcott's voice through the kitchen window, not bothering to lower it. "I heard she's the one who interfered with Dr. Bell's patient." "Tommy Doyle wasn't Dr. Bell's patient anymore by the time she helped him," Ada said. Her voice was flat, and she was clearly not going to feed this. "Bell says she used unsanctioned treatments." "Bell says a lot of things," Ada said. "She's a widow," Ruth Henshaw said in the particular tone that means widow the way other people say warning. "Nobody knows where she came from. Nobody knows what she did before." "She came from Harrow Creek," Ada said. "Her husband died. She walked here looking for work. That's what she did before." A brief silence. "They say she carries a pouch of plant matter," Margaret said. "Herbs," Ada said. "Some would call them something else." "Some would be wrong," Ada said, and the conversation died the way conversations die when a practical woman has had enough of them. Clara stood in the side yard and breathed carefully and looked at the fence post in front of her without seeing it. She had been here before, not at this ranch, not in this county, but in this exact position. The newcomer, the unknown quantity, the woman with the strange pouch and no husband and no history anyone could verify. She knew how it went. The whispers built slowly, and then they built fast, and then one morning they were loud enough that even the people who liked you started to feel the weight of being associated with you. She was angry about it. She let herself feel that fully for 30 seconds. Then she folded it up and put it somewhere useful, because anger that had nowhere to go was just noise, and she didn't have time for noise. What she had time for was work. She went back inside and picked up the mending basket. That evening, Nate came to find her. He knocked on the door of the east room, which she had not expected, and said through the door, "Mrs. Whitaker, do you have a minute?" It wasn't a question. She opened the door. He looked like a man who had spent the afternoon having an argument with himself and wasn't sure who had won. He stood in the hallway with his arms at his sides and his hat in his left hand and said, "Bell came to see me this afternoon." "I heard Margaret Alcott was here this morning," Clara said. "So I expected it." "He wants me to dismiss you." Clara kept her face steady. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the men he was trying to have dismissed were employed on my property and that my property was mine to manage." Nate's jaw set. "But he made it plain that if there are more incidents he'll go to the sheriff with a formal complaint. Practicing medicine without authority is a serious charge in this county." "What I do is not medicine in the legal sense," Clara said. "I don't diagnose. I don't prescribe. I use plant knowledge that has been used by women on this frontier for 100 years. Bell doesn't see the difference." "Bell doesn't want to see the difference," Clara said, "because the difference is inconvenient to his fees." Nate looked at her for a moment. Then something that was almost a short, reluctant breath of something near laughter moved through him, though no sound came out. "You don't pull back from things," he said. "Pulling back doesn't change them," Clara said. He looked at the doorframe. "I'm not dismissing you," he said, "but I need you to be careful. Visible help only. Nothing that Bell can write up as a formal practice." Clara nodded. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, "about Grace." She watched his whole body shift at the name, a subtle tightening through the shoulders. The stillness he controlled his face into the thing his daughter had called the bad face. "What about her?" he said. "I've spent time with her the last few days," Clara said. "By the creek in the mornings. She didn't tell you because she wasn't sure you'd want her there." She chose her words carefully. "Her breathing concerns me, Mr. Calloway. The cough Dr. Bell is treating as a constitutional weakness, I'm not certain that's the whole story." Nate's voice went very even. "Bell has been treating Grace for 2 years. I know. He's a trained physician. I know that too. And you with your herbs and your creek walks, You think you know better than a trained physician." It was not entirely a question, and it was not entirely fair, but Clara understood why it was coming out that way. She understood that she was standing in a doorway, telling a grieving man that the person he trusted most might have missed something important about the only person he had left. "I'm not saying I know better," she said. "I'm saying I'd like permission to spend more time with her, openly, with your knowledge, so I can tell you more clearly what I think I'm hearing." "You said her breathing," Nate said. "Describe it." Clara did. She described the shallow character of it, the careful, measured quality, the way the cough came at night and in the heat. She described the pressure Grace had mentioned without naming herself as its source. Nate listened with his face very still and very far away at the same time, and she recognized in it exactly what Grace had described. When Clara finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "She told you it hurts," he said. His voice had changed. Lower, flatter. "Yes." "She doesn't tell me." "I know," Clara said gently. "She's protecting you." Something moved through his expression that he did not try to control this time, and she looked at the wall beside his head to give him the private space of not being watched while it passed. "Do what you need to do," he said. His voice came out rough. "Spend time with her. Watch her. Tell me what you find." He paused. "And do not let Dr. Bell know you're doing it." "Understood," Clara said. He nodded once and left, and she heard his boots on the hallway floor, and then the creak of the stairs, and then nothing. The days that followed were quiet on the surface, and full of current underneath the way a river looks slow until you put your foot in. Clara spent mornings at the creek with Grace, who had begun bringing her books. A battered primer, a natural history guide missing its cover, once a slim volume of poetry that had belonged to Grace's mother and which Grace carried as if it might dissolve. They read together and talked about plants, and Grace drew more maps of places she hadn't been, and Clara listened to the child's breathing the way she would read a page carefully for what was said and what was left out. What she was hearing was not witchcraft, and it was not a weak constitution. What she was hearing was a child whose lungs worked hard in dry heat, whose chest had learned to brace against coughing fits, who had developed without anyone knowing it, a kind of careful stillness that looked like calm, but was actually accommodation. She said nothing to Grace about this. She simply started bringing yarrow tea in a tin cup to the creek each morning, sweet with the honey she had asked Ada for, and said it was just something good to drink in the heat. Grace drank it without asking questions, which told Clara the child trusted her, which felt like a responsibility she intended to earn properly. Inside the ranch, things were shifting. In the way that things shift when someone the group had decided was an outsider begins to prove that designation wrong. Pete Greer started leaving the newspaper on the kitchen table for her without saying why. A hand named Luis, who was quiet and kept to himself, began crossing the yard at a different angle that happened to take him by the east room door when she was coming out in the morning so that he could nod good morning, which was his equivalent of a speech. Ada began leaving an extra cup of coffee ready before Clara even asked. Caleb watched all of this with his arms crossed and his judgment withheld, which was not hostility. She had learned to read him well enough by now to know that. Caleb was a man who updated his opinions slowly on evidence only and was not embarrassed about it. She respected that more than easy warmth. Hector Mays remained the problem. He did not do anything direct. Men like Hector rarely did. It was the comments at volume, the looks held 2 seconds too long, the particular emphasis he put on the word widow when he was talking to other men where she could hear. It was small, and it was persistent, and it was designed to make her feel that however much ground she gained, there was always someone in the room reminding everyone else that she didn't really belong on it. The morning he called her pouch snake oil within her clear earshot, she was bringing a pail of water to the kitchen house, and she stopped walking. She did not turn around. She said loudly enough for the yard to hear it, "Mr. Mays, Tommy Doyle is alive because of what's in this pouch. You do well to think about whether you want the person who saved your bunkmate's life to know your name primarily as a source of noise." Dead silence in the yard. Then Pete Greer from somewhere to her left said, That's a fair point, Hector. Clara walked on to the kitchen house. She heard nothing more from Hector Mays that day, which was the most she was going to hope for. The dust storm came on a Thursday without much warning. The way they did first, a yellow thinning of the light, then a wind that tasted like iron and sand, then the wall of it rolling across the flatland so fast that Caleb had the men pulling animals under cover in under 10 minutes and still didn't beat it. Clara was inside when it hit. The whole main house groaned against it. Ada stuffed cloth along the windowsills. Grace appeared at the top of the stairs with her cloth doll clutched to her chest, and Clara stood at the bottom and held up her arms, and Grace came down and sat beside her at the kitchen table, and they waited the storm out together while it screamed against the walls. It was in the middle of the storm, in the particular suspended quality of a house under weather attack, that Grace leaned close to Clara's ear and said, "I heard Papa telling Caleb something about Dr. Bell. Something about you." Clara looked at her. "What did you hear?" "Bell told Papa that women who practice root medicine are dangerous," Grace said. "That they gave wrong things to children in the war years, and that's how families lost babies." She watched Clara's face. "Is that true?" "Some women gave wrong things," Clara said carefully. "And some doctors gave wrong things. People make mistakes. The difference is whether they're trying to help or trying to protect themselves." "Which are you? Trying to help?" Clara said. "That's all I've ever tried to do." Grace was quiet for a moment. The wind hit the side of the house hard enough to rattle the stovepipe, and she pressed closer to Clara's side without quite doing it on purpose, the way children attach themselves to solid things when the world gets loud. "I believe you," Grace said. Clara put her arm around the child's thin shoulders carefully without making it a dramatic gesture. Outside, the storm tore itself across the flatland. Inside, something small and important held. The storm broke by nightfall. The world left behind was a thick tan layer of grit on every surface and a sky washed pale and clean. Clara was sweeping the East Hall the following morning when she heard Nate's voice from his study, sharper than usual, and then a second voice she didn't recognize. She kept sweeping. She could not make out the words. She could make out the tone, and the tone told her that whoever was in the study with Nate was not a friend. She rounded the corner of the hall and nearly walked into Caleb, who was standing with his back to the study door and his face set hard. "Who's in there?" she said quietly. Caleb looked at her. "Bell sent a man," he said. "Official complaint. He's filing with the sheriff. Says a widow woman with no credentials is poisoning ranch workers and ought to be removed from the property before anyone else comes to harm." Clara stopped sweeping. "Tommy Doyle is walking and working," she said. "I know that. He nearly lost that arm before I touched it." "I know that too." "Then what does the sheriff need to hear that those two facts don't already tell him?" Caleb's jaw worked. "Bell's also saying something else," he said, and the way he said something else made the back of Clara's neck go cold. He looked at her steadily without pleasure. "He's saying, you've been giving things to Mr. Calloway's daughter, without permission, without her father's knowledge." The broom handle went still in Clara's hands. "That's a lie," she said. Quiet. Absolute. "I know," Caleb said, and the two words came out different this time, without the stiffness she had grown used to, like a man who has made a decision and is standing on the other side of it. "I know it is. I've seen you with Grace. You've been careful. You've been straight with Mr. Calloway about everything." "Then who told Bell?" "Hector Mays," Caleb said. "He saw you at the creek with the tin cup. Told someone in town. That someone talked to Bell." He paused. "Hector didn't know what was in the cup. He just knew it was something you gave her." Clara looked at the study door. Inside, she could hear Nate's voice rising, now controlled, but strained, the sound of a man managing himself at the edge of managing. "He's going to have to choose," Caleb said quietly, "between what he knows and what this county expects him to do." Clara looked back at him. "And what do you expect him to do?" Caleb looked away. "I don't know," he said. "That's what worries me." The study door opened. The man who came out was a clerk type young, wearing a good jacket that meant official business. He walked past Clara without looking at her and out the front door without a word. Nate stood in the study doorway. He looked at Clara. His face was doing the thing Grace had described, very still, very far away, all the weight of it held just behind his eyes. Clara looked back at him and waited. He said, "Is there yarrow in what you've been giving Grace in the mornings?" "Yes," Clara said. "With honey, for her lungs. I told you I was going to watch her." "You didn't tell me about the tea." "No," Clara said. "I should have. You're right." She held his gaze. "But I gave her something that cannot hurt her, that has helped her breathe easier, that she drinks voluntarily, and that I told you was coming the same night I started it." She kept her voice steady. "I made a judgment call about one detail, not about the child's welfare." Something in his face tightened. Then it released. Then it tightened again, and this time it stayed. "Bell's filing with the sheriff," he said. "There's going to be a meeting, town hall. He's calling it a public safety matter." "I heard," Clara said. Nate looked at her. The study door was still open behind him. The whole hall was still except for the sound of the wind that came under the door from outside. "I need time," he said, "to think about what this means for the ranch." Clara looked at him. She understood exactly what he was saying beneath the words, and she understood why he was saying it, and understanding it did not make it hurt any less. "Of course," she said. She picked up the broom and went back to sweeping. She did not let her hands shake until she turned the corner and was out of his sight, and even then she made them stop after a few seconds because shaking was a luxury she had not been able to afford for a very long time. The time Nate said he needed stretched into 3 days, and during those 3 days he spoke to Clara exactly 4 times twice about practical ranch matters, once to ask if the kitchen needed more flour ordered, and once to tell her that Grace would not be going to the creek until further notice. That last one was said quietly without apology, and without eye contact, and it was the one that told her everything she needed to know about where his thinking had landed. Clara said, "Understood," and went back to what she was doing, and that evening she sat on the edge of her cot in the east room and pressed her palms flat on her knees and stared at the wall and did not let herself feel it. She was good at not letting herself feel things. She had been practicing since she was 19 years old, and her first baby came too early and too quiet, and the doctor in Mineral Wells had looked at her with professional distance and said, "These things happen." She had learned that day that feeling things fully in front of other people was a luxury that cost more than she could afford, and she had been careful with that currency ever since. But at night, alone in a room with a door that locked, she had paid for this room, she reminded herself. She had earned it. She allowed herself to feel it then. The particular loneliness of a woman who has made herself useful to people who still haven't decided whether they want her. In the morning, she was up before anyone, and the broom was in her hand, and her face was even, and there was nothing in it that gave anything away. On the 4th morning, Grace came to find her. She was not supposed to. That much was plain from the way she moved fast and purposeful with the particular focus of a child who has decided that the rules apply up until the point they conflict with something more important. She came around the corner of the kitchen house while Clara was drawing water and stopped 3 feet away and looked at her. "Papa said I can't go to the creek," Grace said. "I know," Clara said. "He didn't say I can't talk to you." Clara looked at her. "Grace? Did you do something wrong?" Grace said, straight and direct the way children ask questions when they've already heard too many adult versions of the answer and want the true one. Clara set the water pail down. She crouched so she was level with the child's eyes, which were very serious and very steady and more her father's than she probably knew. "I gave you tea without telling your father first," Clara said. "I told him I was going to watch you and help you. I should have told him about the tea specifically. I didn't. That was a mistake in how I handled it, even if the tea itself was right." Grace thought about this with the concentrated seriousness she brought to everything. "Tom Hensley's grandmother makes him willow tea when he's sick," she said. Nobody calls that dangerous. Tom Hensley's grandmother isn't a widow from somewhere else, Clara said. And that's not fair. But it's true. Papa knows you didn't mean any harm. I think he does, Clara said. But knowing something and acting on it are different things. Your father has other things to consider. Like Dr. Bell, Grace said, and the flatness in her small voice when she said the name was a thing Clara filed away and did not comment on. Like a lot of things, Clara said. Grace looked at the water pail. Then she looked at Clara. My chest hurt last night, she said quietly. The pressing feeling. It was bad. Clara kept her face still. How bad? I sat up for a while. It helped some. Grace paused. Ada heard me and brought water. She didn't tell Papa. Ada is a good woman, Clara said. Will you? Grace stopped, started again. If Papa said you can't give me things, can you still just tell me what would help, so I know? Clara looked at this 7-year-old child, this slight, serious girl who had learned to manage her own pain quietly so her father wouldn't grieve, and something behind her sternum tightened so hard it was almost a physical thing. Steam helps, she said. Hot water in a basin with a cloth over your head, not boiling warm enough to make real steam. Breathe it for 10 minutes. It opens the passages. She kept her voice even and informational. And sleep on your side, not your back. It lets your lungs expand more easily. Grace nodded, committing it to memory, with the seriousness of someone who knows she is going to need it. Thank you, ma'am, she said. Then she turned and walked back toward the house, straight and careful, her breathing just barely audible in the morning air. Clara picked up the water pail and stood there for a moment. She knew what she was hearing. She had heard it before on a rancher's wife outside Mineral Wells, on 2 children in Harrow Creek, the winter before last. She knew what the pressing feeling meant, and she knew what happened when that feeling went unaddressed, through a summer in dry heat, with dust storms rolling through every 2 weeks. She needed to talk to Nate. Today. Before the town meeting Belle had called before the official complaint solidified into something harder to undo. She went to find him. He was in the north pasture with Caleb going over fencing that the storm had damaged, and he saw her coming across the open ground from 50 yards away. She watched him watch her approach and do nothing to make it easier, just stood there with his arms crossed and waited. I need 5 minutes, she said when she reached him. Caleb, check the east post, Nate said. Caleb went without comment, which was its own kind of statement. Nate looked at Clara. What is it? Grace's lungs are getting worse, Clara said. Not dramatically, but the direction is wrong for late summer. It should be easier as she gets used to the heat, instead it's harder. She kept her voice level and factual because she had learned that he heard information better than emotion. What Belle is calling a weak constitution is something specific. I think her lungs have a tendency toward inflammation. The dry heat aggravates it. If it goes far enough, it can become something that no amount of willow tea handles. Nate was very still. What are you saying? I'm saying she needs consistent care this summer, not heroic intervention, consistent, careful management. Steam certain herbs, watching her breathing and adjusting. The kind of care that prevents a crisis rather than responding to one. And you think you're the person to provide that? I think I'm the person on this property who knows how, Clara said. I'm not asking you to trust me beyond what I've already shown you. I'm asking you to look at what I've shown you and make a decision. Nate looked away across the pasture. His jaw was set. She could see the muscle working in it, the visible sign of a man having an argument with himself that she was not invited to witness but could not help seeing. The town meeting is Saturday, he said. I know. Belle has already spoken to Pastor Wills and 2 members of the county board. They're calling it a safety forum. He said it with the flatness of a man who finds certain things beneath comment. I know that too, Clara said. If I come out publicly against Belle on this, I'm not asking you to come out publicly against anyone, Clara said. I'm asking you to let me care for your daughter quietly between us with your full knowledge of everything I do. She paused. That's all. He turned back to her. His face was doing the faraway stillness thing, But underneath it, in the set of his mouth, was something that looked like a man standing at a fork in a road he didn't choose to be on. "Let me get through Saturday," he said. "Let me hear what Belle says formally. Then I'll give you an answer." Clara looked at him. "And between now and Saturday?" "Between now and Saturday," he said, "I need you to stay visible and stay quiet and not give anyone anything they can use." She held his gaze for a beat. "And Grace?" Something moved through his face. Fast, controlled, gone. "Ada is watching her," he said. "She'll be fine for 3 days." Clara nodded once and walked back across the pasture, and she did not let herself run through the calculations of what 3 days of worsening dry heat could do to a child whose lungs were already working too hard. She just walked, steady, one foot, then the other. Saturday came with the particular cruelty of the Texas summer at its peak, a white sky that had forgotten how to make clouds heat that pressed down on the town of Delwood like a hand flat on a table. Nate rode in with Caleb. Clara was not asked to come, which was itself an answer to a question she hadn't asked out loud. She knew the moment they left that the waiting would be worse than being there, so she worked. She and Ada cleaned the main house from top to bottom, which Ada said it needed anyway, and which was true, and which also gave both of them something to do with their hands during the hours that stretched like pulled wire. Pete Greer found her in the late afternoon. He came to the kitchen door and said, "They're back," and the way he said it, flat careful, giving her nothing, told her something about what kind of back it was. She dried her hands and walked to the front of the house. Nate and Caleb came through the gate together, and even from that distance, she could read the difference between them. Caleb was tight-jaw shoulders, the particular set of a man who has watched something he disagreed with happen and said nothing. Nate was the opposite. He was very loose, very controlled, the kind of careful stillness that comes after a decision has been made and a person has organized themselves around it. He came to her directly. She appreciated that, even knowing what was coming. "Belle had 3 witnesses," he said. 2 of the church women who were at the ranch when Margaret Alcott visited, and Hector Mays. "Hector Mays," Clara repeated. "He told them about the creek mornings, the tin cup, the plant pouch." Nate held her gaze. He described it in the worst possible terms. The women took it from there. "And the sheriff? Mercer is a fair man," Nate said. "He didn't issue a removal order. He said the complaint was informal and that there was no evidence of harm." He paused. "But he asked me to make sure the situation on my property is managed." "Managed?" Clara said. "His word." A short silence. "What does managed mean?" Clara said. "In terms of what happens next." Nate looked at her, and she saw in that look the exact moment a man stops negotiating with his own conscience and accepts an outcome he does not entirely want. "Belle is going to come out here on Monday," he said, "to examine Grace himself, formally on record. And while he's here, and until this thing with the complaint dies down, I need you to step back from Grace." The words landed the way a physical thing lands solid with weight. "Step back," Clara said. "From the direct care, from the creek mornings, from the tea." His voice was even, too even. "It's temporary, until the formal complaint is closed." "Her lungs." "Belle will see her Monday." "Belle has been seeing her for 2 years," Clara said. Quiet, not angry, just absolutely clear. "And in 2 years he has called it a weak constitution and given her syrup that makes her sleep and done nothing that makes her breathe easier." "I know that," Nate said. "Then you know what stepping back means." "Clara." He said her name instead of her title, which was the first time, and it was wrong that the first time was here in this moment, in this context. "I have a county I live in, and a business that operates in it, and a daughter who will grow up here long after this is resolved. I have to manage that." "You're managing it on her health," Clara said. He flinched. Small, controlled, but she saw it. 3 days, he said. "Give me 3 days. Let Belle come Monday. Let him examine her, and then we talk again." He looked at her directly. I am not doing nothing. I am asking for 3 days. Clara looked at this man, this closed, careful, complicated man, who loved his daughter more than he knew how to say, and was still making the wrong choice. And she understood that understanding something did not obligate her to be peaceful about it. 3 days, she said. She walked back to the east room, and she did not slam the door because slamming it would have made her feel better for exactly 5 seconds, and worse for the rest of the night. She sat on the cot and pressed her hands flat on her knees and stared at the wall, and this time the 60 seconds were not enough, and she knew it, so she gave herself 10 minutes. She felt it fully, all of it, the injustice and the helplessness and the old familiar weight of being a woman with knowledge that no one in authority would let her use. She felt it until it became something she could carry rather than something that carried her. Then she stood up and started thinking about Grace's lungs and what the next 3 days of summer heat would do. Sunday was the longest day. She saw Grace twice, once at breakfast, where Grace sat across from her and said nothing, but looked at her with those steady, careful eyes, reading whatever was in Clara's face, with the accuracy of a child who has learned to read adults the way other people read weather. Clara looked back and kept her expression neutral and friendly, which was the hardest thing she had done in weeks. The second time was late afternoon. Grace came into the kitchen where Ada was finishing supper and sat at the table and said she was tired. She said it simply, factually, without complaint. Ada felt her forehead with the back of her hand and said she didn't have a fever and sent her to lie down. Clara stood in the doorway and watched Grace walk down the hall and listened to her breathing. The careful, measured quality was different from this morning. Slightly more work. A little more effort in each breath, like a person carrying something heavier than they started with. Ada, Clara said. Ada looked at her. Watch her tonight, Clara said. Check on her after she's been asleep 2 hours. If her breathing sounds tight or she's restless, come get me, no matter what time. Ada looked at her steadily. She had not asked any questions about any of this, not the town meeting, not Belle, not any of it. She just looked at Clara now with the expression of a woman who has been managing a household for 20 years and recognizes when something important is being said plainly. I'll check on her, Ada said. Clara nodded and went back to work. Kied. Nobody came to her door that night. She woke twice from habit and lay in the dark, listening to the house breathe around her, and heard nothing that alarmed her, and she told herself that was good, and she almost believed it. Monday morning, Dr. Bell arrived at 9 o'clock. He came in a good buggy with a new medical bag, and he was dressed formally, which Clara understood immediately was deliberate, the clothes of a man making an official record. He went past the kitchen house without looking at it up the steps, and Nate met him at the door. Clara was in the kitchen with Ada. Neither of them spoke for a while. He's going to say she's fine, Ada said finally. She was stirring something on the stove that didn't need stirring. He always says she's fine, and then Nate pays him $3 and he goes back to town, and Grace is the same as before he came. I know, Clara said. You're scared, Ada said. Not accusatory, just a fact. I'm concerned, Clara said. That's the same thing with you, Ada said. I've noticed. Clara looked at her. Ada shrugged one shoulder and kept stirring. Bell was in the house for 40 minutes. When he came back down the steps, he had his bag in his hand, and his expression arranged into the professional sympathy of a man delivering expected news. Nate walked him to his buggy. Their voices were low and Clara could not hear them, but she watched through the kitchen window, and she watched Nate's body language, and what she saw was a man receiving information that he wanted to believe, because believing it was easier. Bell got into his buggy and drove out, and Nate stood in the yard and looked at the dust the wheels left and didn't move for a moment. Then he turned and came to the kitchen house. He came in and looked at Clara and said, Bell says her lungs are clear. No infection, no inflammation. He says the summer has been hard on her, but the Constitution is managing. Clara was quiet. He's adjusting her syrup, Nate said. Double the dose through August. The syrup suppresses her cough, Clara said. It doesn't help her breathe. It just makes her cough less, which means you see less of the symptom, which is not the same as her lungs being better. Belle says, "What did Grace tell Belle about the pressing feeling?" Clara said. Nate stopped. "Did she tell him?" Clara said. He said nothing, which was its own answer. Grace had told Clara in the quiet of a creek morning that she did not tell Dr. Bell things because he wrote notes in his book and showed them to her father, and then her father had the bad face for a week. Grace had learned to manage Bell the same way she managed everything, by showing him the version that made things easiest. She didn't tell him, Clara said. It was not a question. She said she was feeling well, Nate said. Low, slightly strained. "She's protecting you," Clara said for the second time, and this time it landed differently, not gently, but with weight, the way true things land when they come back around. Nate was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the window, the yard, his own hands. "I told Belle you'd be stepping back from any informal involvement," he said. He accepted that. Something in Clara went very still. "You told him," she said. "I needed the complaint closed." "You told him before you came to tell me." The silence in the kitchen was suddenly large. Ada stopped stirring. Nate looked at Clara, and she could see clearly that he knew exactly what he had done, and could not undo it, and was standing in the aftermath of it with the face of a man who has traded something real for something that only looked like safety. "The complaint is closed," he said, "the formal one. And unofficially," he said nothing. "Unofficially," Clara said very quietly, "you've decided that a doctor who has watched your daughter get worse for 2 years is more trustworthy than the person who has spent 6 weeks actually listening to her." She kept her voice even, absolutely even. "Because he has a title, and I have a pouch of plants, and this county knows which one of those carries more weight." "That's not," he started. "It is," she said. "You know it is, and so do I. And so does Grace." She turned and walked to the east room. She did not slam the door. She opened the leather pouch on the cot and looked at what was inside and began to think about packing. She did not pack. Not yet. She lay awake instead, going back and forth on the question the way you go back and forth on a decision you know you've already made but aren't ready to name yet. She was good at this work, and Grace needed it, and leaving felt like abandonment. But staying in a position where she could see exactly what needed doing and was officially forbidden from doing it, that was its own kind of damage. She thought about her husband. She thought about Harrow Creek and the 40 miles of road that had brought her here, and what she had thought she was walking toward and what she had actually found. She thought about Grace saying, "I believe you," in the middle of a dust storm pressing against her side like a small determined anchor. She did not sleep. Around 2 in the morning she heard Ada in the hallway, not moving toward the kitchen, moving fast, deliberate toward the east room. A knock at the door. 3 fast raps, and then Ada's voice stripped of its usual flatness. "Clara, come now." Clara was on her feet before Ada finished the sentence. She came out of the east room, and Ada's face told her everything she needed to know before a single word was said. It was the face of a woman who has seen something that frightened her and is fighting not to show it to the person she needs to stay calm. "She's not right," Ada said. "Her breathing. It changed about an hour ago, and I didn't like it, so I stayed, and it's getting worse. She won't wake up proper." Clara was already moving toward the stairs. Grace was in her bed, lying on her back, which Clara had told her not to do. But that was not the moment's concern. Her chest was working visibly, each breath shallow and effortful and wrong, in the particular way of lungs that have been fighting inflammation for too long and have reached the hour when they stop compensating and start failing. Her lips had the faintest blue cast in the lamplight. Clara put 2 fingers to the girl's wrist. Pulse fast and light. She pressed her ear close to Grace's chest and listened, and what she heard sent ice through the center of her. "Get Nate," she said. Ada was gone before the words were fully out. Clara turned Grace onto her side and held her steady and said, "Grace, I'm here. Don't fight the breathing. Let it come slow." The child stirred, but didn't wake, which was better than her being fully conscious to feel this, and worse in every other way. Nate came through the door, still dressed, which meant he hadn't slept either, and he stopped at the sight of his daughter, and something in him, the careful, controlled construction of Nathaniel Calloway, rancher, widower, man in charge of things, simply broke open. "What's happening?" he said. "Inflammation," Clara said, and she kept her hands steady and her voice professional because someone in this room had to. "Her lungs have been building to this. The blue in her lips means she's not moving enough air. I need steam hot water, time whorehound. I have them in my pouch, clean cloths, and I need everyone out of this room except you and me." Nate was already at the door. "Ada, wake Luis and Pete. I need the stove going now. Hot water, get it going. Move." Then, he was back into the room, crouching beside the bed on Grace's other side, putting his hand on her face with the particular tenderness of a man who does not touch anything gently in his regular life. "She's breathing," Clara said. "She's fighting. That's good. Don't let her feel scared." "Grace." His voice cracked on the name and he let it. "I'm here, sweetheart. Right here." Grace's eyes moved under her lids. Ada brought the first basin of hot water, 17 minutes later, moving at a speed Clara had not seen from her before, and Clara had the herbs in before the basin was fully on the stand. She rigged a cloth tent over Grace's head and the basin, and began the slow work of steam and pressure and patience. Nate held the lamp. He did not speak. He did not ask questions. He did exactly what Clara needed him to do without being asked, which was to hold the light steady so she could see what her hands were doing. And she understood in that moment that he was a man who, when things came down to what actually mattered, was capable of standing in the right place. It did not erase the past 3 days, but it was something. "Talk to her," Clara said, not looking up. "Her name. Keep saying it." "Grace," Nate said. "Grace Calloway. You're at the ranch. You're in your bed. Papa's right here, and you're going to be all right." 30 minutes in, Grace's chest was still working too hard. 40 minutes in, Clara changed the basin and added more herb and kept her hands moving and did not let herself calculate odds. 50 minutes in, Nate said, "Clara," in a voice she had not heard from him before, low and afraid and completely unguarded, and she looked at Grace and saw what he saw. The child's lips, the effort in each breath, the way her small body was spending everything it had. And for the first time that night, Clara felt the fear fully. Instead of behind the glass, she kept it behind. "She's still here," Clara said. "The steam is reaching. Give it more time. More time." Nate repeated like a man repeating something in a language he doesn't fully speak. "Nate." She said his name the way he had said hers, without the title, without the distance. "Look at me." He looked. "I have done this before," Clara said. "I have sat in this room, not this room, but this moment, and I have brought people through it. It takes longer than we want it to. But she is fighting, and I am fighting with her, and you need to hold that lamp steady and keep saying her name." He looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he turned back to Grace and said, "Grace. Grace, sweetheart. Papa's here. You hear me?" Grace's hand moved, small, slow, finding his in the lamplight. He made a sound that was not quite a word. Clara went back to work. At the 1 hour and 10-minute mark, Grace coughed. Not the careful, suppressed cough Clara had been hearing for 6 weeks. A real one, deep, productive, the sound of lungs clearing something that had been sitting too long. Then another, then a third. And then, between the third and fourth cough, her breathing changed. Not all the way. Not to normal. But the character of it shifted, less effort, less that terrible working quality. A small release. Clara sat back on her heels and allowed herself one breath of her own. "Is that?" Nate started. "It's better," Clara said. "Her lungs are clearing. It's going to be a while more, but the direction changed." She looked at him. The direction changed. He bent his head over his daughter's hand and said nothing, and she looked at the wall and gave him the privacy of that. 20 minutes later, Grace opened her eyes properly for the first time. She was confused and tired, and the cough still came in waves, but her eyes were clear and her lips were losing the blue, and when she saw Clara beside her, she said in a voice rough as creek gravel, "You came." "I came," Clara said. Grace looked at her father. She looked at the lamp in his hand, and his face above it, and the undone quality of him that she had probably never seen before. "Don't have the face, Papa," she whispered. Nate made the sound again, that wordless, undone sound, and pressed her hand to his mouth. Clara stood and carried the basin to the far side of the room and busied herself with repacking her pouch, because some moments don't belong to the person who caused them, and she understood that clearly. She heard Nate stand. She heard him walk across the room toward her, and she thought she knew what was coming. Gratitude, perhaps? Or more conditions? Or the particular complex speech of a man trying to reconcile 3 days of wrong with 1 night of right? What came instead was his voice low and close behind her left shoulder. "I chose the man who failed her," he said, "over the woman who never did. I knew it when I was doing it. I did it anyway." Clara held still. "I was afraid," he said. "Not of Belle, not of the county board, of what it means to trust someone that much again after—" He stopped, started again. "I've been afraid of it since the day you walked in through my gate." Clara turned around. He was standing closer than she expected, and his face was completely open, which she had not seen before. All the careful, managed blankness gone. And underneath it was exactly the man she had been catching glimpses of for 6 weeks. The man who held a lamp steady all night, who said her name like it cost him something, who crouched beside his daughter's bed and let his voice crack. "I didn't protect her," he said. "I protected my own fear. And you're the reason she's still breathing, and I stood in that kitchen 2 days ago and told you to step back." Clara looked at him. "You sent for me tonight." "Ada did." "You came." He was quiet. "You didn't send me away when you saw what was happening," Clara said. "You held the lamp. You said her name." She held his gaze. "That's not nothing, Mr. Calloway." "It's not enough," he said. "No," Clara agreed. "It isn't, but it's where you start." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the floor at his own boots, and something in the set of his shoulders shifted, not collapse, but release. The kind of release that comes when a man stops carrying something he was never meant to carry alone. "Tell me what she needs," he said. "All of it. Everything in that pouch that helps her. I want to know it." Clara looked at the leather pouch in her hands. Then she looked at him. "Sit down," she said. "I'll make tea, for Grace and for you both, and I'll tell you everything." He pulled the wooden chair from the wall and sat down beside his daughter's bed without a word of argument, and that a man like Nathaniel Calloway sitting down when a woman told him to in his own house without pride getting in the way, told her more than anything else that had passed between them in 6 weeks. She went to the doorway and called quietly for Ada to bring more hot water. Behind her, she could hear Nate's voice low and steady saying his daughter's name over and over in the dark. Not because Grace needed to hear it anymore, because he did. And outside the window, the summer night pressed on fierce and indifferent and vast the way it always was out here. But inside this room something had cracked open that had been sealed shut for a long time, and the light coming through the crack was small, but it was real, and Clara Whitaker, who had walked 40 miles on a broken boot to find something worth standing on, knew better than most people how much a small real light was worth. Ada brought hot water 3 more times before the night was done. She did it without being asked, after the first just appeared in the doorway every 40 minutes, with a fresh basin and a look that said she had decided which side of this she was on and would not be moved from it. She did not speak. She set the basin down, collected the old one, and left, and the quiet efficiency of it was its own kind of loyalty that Clara felt more than she could have said. Grace slept properly just before 4 in the morning. Not the restless, half-unconsciousness of before real sleep, deep, and even her chest rising and falling with a rhythm that was still not perfect, but was so much better than 2 hours ago that Nate sat beside the bed and watched it for a full 5 minutes without saying a word, like a man checking something he couldn't quite believe was real. Clara repacked her pouch and set it on the washstand and lowered herself into the chair in the corner. Every part of her body had opinions about the last several hours. She ignored them. "She'll need steam again in the morning," she said quietly, "before the heat gets serious, and again in the evening. For at least the next 2 weeks, maybe longer. The inflammation will try to come back. It's going to take consistent work to keep it from settling in the way it did tonight." Nate was still looking at Grace. "Show me," he said. "The steam, the herbs, all of it. I want to be able to do it myself if something happens and I need to." "Nothing is going to happen," Clara said. He looked at her then. "Show me anyway." She did. She walked him through every herb in the pouch, which ones for the lungs, which ones for fever, which ones she never used without a specific reason. She showed him the proportions, the temperatures, the timing. He listened the way he did everything with complete attention and no wasted questions, only the ones that mattered. "The yarrow tea," he said. "The one you were giving her at the creek?" "Yes." "How long does it take to work?" "It's not fast medicine," Clara said. "It's maintenance. You drink it consistently for weeks, and the inflammation becomes less of a pattern. It's like keeping a fence in good repair instead of waiting for the cattle to get through." He turned that over. "How long before you saw it helping her?" "Honestly, she was breathing easier by the second week, but I couldn't be certain how much was the tea and how much was the cooler mornings." Clara paused. "Tonight told me more than 6 weeks of creek mornings." "Because tonight showed what happens without it," he said. "Yes." He was quiet. On the bed, Grace shifted slightly and made a small sound and settled again without waking. Both of them went still until she was still. "I owe you an apology," Nate said. "Not a complicated one. A plain one." He looked at Clara directly. "I was wrong. About Belle, about the complaint about asking you to step back. I knew it when I was doing it, and I did it anyway, and my daughter paid for my cowardice." He said the last word like it cost him something, like a man who does not use that word about himself easily and means it fully when he does. "I'm sorry, Clara." The name again. This time it fit the moment. "Apology accepted," she said. Not warmly, not coldly, honestly. He nodded. "What do you need from me going forward?" "Your word," Clara said. "That what I do here is work and not charity, and not something that gets revised when the county board has opinions. If I'm going to help Grace properly, I need to know that the ground I'm standing on doesn't shift every time someone in town talks." "You have it," he said. "And if Belle comes back, I'll handle Belle," Nate said, and the particular flatness in those 3 words told her that handling Belle had been an idea he'd been working toward for longer than this night. Clara leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. "Sleep," Nate said. "I'm fine." "You've been awake since before Ada knocked on your door. Sleep in the chair if you won't go to your room. I'll watch her." Clara opened her eyes and looked at him sitting beside his daughter's bed with his elbows on his knees and the lamp still in his hands, the oil burning low now but steady. "You need sleep too," she said. "I've gone longer without it," he said. "Ranch work. War before that." He looked at the lamp flame. "I've sat through worse nights than this one." She believed him. She closed her eyes again. This time, she let herself rest. The morning came hard and bright the way August mornings in Texas always did, with no apology and no transition, just darkness and then light. Clara woke to the sound of Grace's voice. It was a real voice, thin and a little rough still, but present and awake and forming actual words. Grace was telling her father that she was hungry, and Nate's response was so immediate and so flooded with relief, trying to pass itself off as practicality, that Clara almost smiled with her eyes still closed. "Ada," he called toward the hallway. "Grace wants breakfast." "I heard her," Ada called back from somewhere that suggested she had not been far away. "I've had it ready for an hour." Clara sat up in the chair and straightened her back, which had developed several complaints overnight, and looked at Grace. Grace looked back. She was pale and tired, and her eyes had the slightly scoured look of someone who has been sick and is still finding the edges of herself, but the blue was gone from her lips entirely. Her breathing was audible but workable. "Good morning," Clara said. "Good morning," Grace said. Then, "I remember you were here. In the night." "I was. I remember your voice," Grace said. "And Papa's." She looked at her father with the frank assessment of a 7-year-old who has just seen something new in a person she thought she knew completely. "You were scared," she told him, not accusatory, just noting it. "I was," Nate said. "You don't usually let me see when you're scared." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry about that." Grace considered him for a moment with those steady eyes. Then she said, "I'm glad you did," and reached for his hand, and that was all she said about it, because Grace Calloway at 7 had already learned the profound economy of saying exactly the necessary thing and no more. Bell arrived at 9:30. Nobody had told him to come. He came because word traveled in a small town, the way water traveled in dry ground through every crack, whether you wanted it to or not. And someone, probably the hand who had ridden for supplies yesterday, had said enough that Bell understood he had a public position to defend. He came with the sheriff. Daniel Mercer was a lean, quiet man in his late 40s who wore his authority the way a person wears something they've had long enough that it's shaped to them not performing it, just carrying it. He rode beside Bell's buggy on a bay horse, and he looked at the ranch house when they stopped with the expression of a man who is here because it's his job and has not yet decided what he thinks. Nate met them in the yard. Clara heard the exchange from the kitchen doorway, and she did not go closer, because the distance was strategic, present enough to be seen, removed enough not to inflame. "I heard there was a medical incident last night," Bell said. He had his bag again. "I came to assess my patient." "Grace is recovering," Nate said. His voice was completely level. "Recovering from what exactly? And treated how exactly?" "Treated by Mrs. Whitaker," Nate said, "who spent the night managing a pulmonary crisis that your syrup was not preventing." Bell's expression did something complicated. "Mr. Calloway, I explained to you clearly that Grace's constitution—" "Her constitution isn't weak," Nate said. "Her lungs have a tendency toward inflammation that has been building all summer. Mrs. Whitaker identified it 6 weeks ago. She told me. I didn't act on it the way I should have." He paused, and the pause was the kind that means the next sentence has been thought about carefully. "That's on me, not on her." Sheriff Mercer, who had been listening from his horse without expression, said, "How's the child this morning?" "She ate breakfast," Nate said. "She's breathing easier than she has in months." Mercer nodded slowly. He looked at Bell, who had gone very still in the particular way of a man reorganizing himself. Then he looked past Nate toward the kitchen doorway, where Clara stood with her hands folded and her face neutral. "Ma'am," he said. "Sheriff," Clara said. "I understand you worked through the night." "I did." "Any formal complaint about what you used or how you used it?" "None that I know of," Clara said. "Mr. Calloway was present the entire time, as was Ada, who works the kitchen, as was Pete Greer and Luis Reyes, who carried water." She kept her voice factual and unhurried. "I used steam and medicinal herbs. I did nothing that a trained physician would object to if he had been there to see it." Bell opened his mouth. "If he had been there to see it," Clara repeated, steady as a fence post, and Bell closed his mouth. Mercer looked at Bell. "Amos," he said, "the child is breathing and eating breakfast. The father is satisfied. I'm not sure what the complaint is this morning." "The complaint," Bell said, controlled but strained, "is that an unlicensed woman is practicing medicine on a child I have been entrusted to treat in contradiction of my prescribed course of care." "Your prescribed course of care," Nate said, "was double syrup." He said it without heat, which made it worse than if he'd shouted. "My daughter turned blue in the dark. My prescribed course of care is whatever kept that from happening again." A silence fell over the yard. Mercer looked at Bell for a long moment. Then he looked at Nate. "Mr. Calloway, is there anything on this property that you believe requires official attention?" "No," Nate said. "Then I believe my business here is concluded." Mercer touched the brim of his hat. Mrs. Whitaker." He turned his horse and rode back out through the gate at an unhurried walk. Bell stood in the yard. He was a man who had built his entire position in this county on the belief that education was the same as authority, and authority was the same as being right, and he was standing in the yard of Red Mesa Ranch, watching both of those beliefs come apart at the seams in front of a foreman, two ranch hands who had appeared from somewhere nearby, and a widow woman in an apron. "Amos," Nate said, and the use of the first name was a deliberate shift, the shift from one kind of relationship to another. "I want to say something to you without malice." Bell looked at him. "You are not a bad physician," Nate said. "I believe you have done your best by grace as far as your training took you. But your training didn't have an answer for what was happening to her. And instead of saying so, you defended what you knew and dismissed what you didn't." He paused. "A title is not the same as wisdom. I've known that about ranching my whole life. It applies to medicine too." Bell looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara, and in that look was something more complicated than anger. Something that in another man, in another moment, might have grown into honesty, but wasn't there yet, and might not get there. He picked up his bag. "If the child worsens," he said stiffly, "I trust you'll send for qualified help." "If she worsens," Nate said, "I'll go to the woman who kept her alive last night." Bell got into his buggy and drove out. Hector Mays, who had been standing near the bunkhouse and had heard all of it, looked at the ground and then walked away in the other direction and did not look at Clara, which was its own form of conclusion. Pete Greer appeared at Clara's shoulder. "That went about right," he said. "It did," Clara said. He went back to work. The week that followed moved differently than anything that had come before it. It was not dramatic. The drama had already happened, and what comes after drama, if things go the right way, is the quieter and more durable thing of people simply adjusting to a new arrangement. The ranch adjusted. The men felt it first the way men who work together feel shifts in the air before they can name them. Something had settled on Red Mesa Ranch. Some argument that had been running underneath everything since Clara arrived had come to a conclusion, and the conclusion was not what some of them had expected, and most of them had decided to accept it. Hector Mays put in a transfer request to a ranch down south. Caleb told Clara with neither satisfaction nor apology, just fact, and she received it the same way. Tommy Doyle stopped her one morning and said, "I wrote that letter, to my wife, about the yarrow and the willow bark." He paused. She wrote back. "She said to thank you, and that you should know someone in this world is saying a prayer for you by name every Sunday." Clara looked at him. "Tell her I appreciate that very much." She also said, "If you're ever in San Antonio to come for supper," Tommy said, "and that she makes a good pie." "I believe her," Clara said, and meant it. Meant. Grace improved in the visible daily way of a child whose body has been waiting for the right kind of help. The morning steam became a ritual. Clara and Ada managed it together. Grace sitting patient and slightly dignified over the basin with the cloth tent over her head, making commentary from underneath it about the smell of the thyme and whether eucalyptus was the most unpleasant thing that had ever existed. "It smells like a barn," Grace said from under the cloth on the fourth morning. "It works like medicine," Clara said. "Can't it work and smell nice?" "Most things that work don't smell nice," Clara said. "That's been my experience." From under the cloth came a sound that was unmistakably a small laugh, followed immediately by a cough, which was still there, and would be for a while, but was shorter and less effortful every day, and carried with it the quality of a thing that is passing, rather than building. Nate noticed. He noticed the way a man notices something he has been watching for standing back from it, measuring its change against the memory of what it was before. He did not say much about it. But he started coming to the kitchen in the mornings for his coffee a little later, so that he was still there when the steam session was ending, and Grace came out from under the cloth flushed and slightly grumpy, and more real and alive than she had looked in months. He would say something brief and ordinary to his daughter about the day, about the horses, about what Ada was making for supper, and Grace would answer with her particular serious directness, and Clara would collect the basin and move to the far side of the room and work quietly and not look at him. And not looking, took a deliberate small effort that she was honest enough with herself to acknowledge. It was on the 6th day that Caleb came to find her at the end of the afternoon, when the heat was finally beginning to release its hold on the day and the light was going amber and long. He stood in the kitchen doorway and turned his hat in both hands. Both hands, not one which she had learned meant he was working up to something that mattered, and said, "I want to say something." "Go ahead," Clara said. "I was the first person to tell you this ranch didn't want you," he said. "I was wrong." Clara set down the knife she was holding. She looked at him. "I thought you were going to be trouble," he said. "Widow women who show up without much and ask for more than they've got ground to stand on, I've seen it go badly. I was protecting the ranch." "I know," Clara said. "You protected it better than I did," he said. "That night, and the weeks before it." He held her gaze, which she could see cost him something. Not because he was a man who lied, but because he was a man who held his assessments close and did not often offer them without being asked. "Thank you, Mr. Rusk," she said. "Caleb," he said. He put his hat back on. "You can call me Caleb." He left. She went back to the knife. But her hands were not quite steady, which she allowed, because there was no one in the room to see it. The herb house came up on a Thursday. It was not a conversation she expected. She came back from the creek in the morning to find Nate standing near the kitchen garden with a measuring piece of rope in his hand, and Luis Reyes beside him with a fence post and a slightly puzzled expression. "What are you building?" she asked. "A workroom," Nate said. He didn't look up from the rope. "For the herb work. You need proper space to dry plants and store what you have and work without it being in your bedroom or the kitchen table." Clara looked at the space he was measuring. It was a good spot near the kitchen garden, east-facing with natural airflow. "That's not necessary," she said. "I didn't ask if it was necessary," he said. He looked up. "Do you want a window on the south side or east?" She looked at the space, then at him. "East," she said. "The morning light is better for identifying plants." He looked back at Luis. "East window," he said. Luis nodded and started on the post. Clara stood there a moment longer. "This is recognition," she said. Not a question. "It's a workroom," Nate said. "It's recognition," she repeated. He looked at her, and something in his expression was slightly uncomfortable, the way a man looks when someone has accurately named a thing he was hoping would pass as practical. "Maybe," he said. "Thank you," she said. "East window," he said again, unnecessarily, and went back to measuring. It was 2 weeks after the night of the crisis that Dr. Bell's formal complaint was officially withdrawn. Mercer sent word through a rider, a single sentence on county letterhead. Nate read it, set it on the kitchen table, and looked at Clara. "It's done," he said. "Yes," she said. He picked the letter back up and folded it and put it in his breast pocket, which she thought was interesting, a man who keeps certain things close rather than filing them away. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "People from the Harmon farm came by yesterday," he said. "While you were at the creek with Grace. Their youngest has had a fever that won't break for 4 days. They'd been to Bell twice." He paused. "I told them to come back today." Clara understood immediately. "You told them I'd see her." "I told them you might be able to help," he said carefully. "I didn't want to promise." "I'll see her," Clara said. "Bring them to the kitchen. I need good light and Ada's table." Something moved through his face. Not surprise exactly. More like the settling of something that has been trying to settle for a while and has finally found level ground. "I'll send Luis to bring them up from the gate." He started to go, then stopped. "There may be more," he said. "People who can't afford Bell. People who've heard—" He stopped. "I want you to know that I'm not offering you a charity post. I'm telling you that what you know is worth something real, and I want it known on this property and this county that it's worth something." Clara looked at this man, this careful, difficult, genuine man who had taken 6 weeks and a crisis to find his way to a sentence that most people would have offered on the first day, but who, now that he'd found it, meant it down to the bone. "I know," she said. "Good," he said, and turned to go again. "Nate," she said. He stopped, turned back. "The Harmon girl," she said. "If it's the lung fever that's been going through the settlements, and I think it might be from what I've been hearing, I'm going to need more horehound than I have. I need to ride into Delwood for supplies." "I'll drive you," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You'll drive me." "I'll drive you," he repeated, and his voice had the particular steady quality that meant this was not up for discussion. Though it was not an order, it was a man saying plainly that he intends to put himself alongside someone in a public place, which in a small county, in 1874, said something that a great deal of conversation could not. Clara understood what it said. "After I see the Harmon girl," she said. After he agreed and went out, Clara looked at Ada, who had been at the stove during this entire exchange, with the focused attention of someone who is very carefully not listening and hearing every word. "Don't say anything," Clara said. "I didn't say a word," Ada said. "You're thinking loudly." "I'm cooking," Ada said with great dignity, and turned back to the stove. The Harmon family arrived an hour later. Mother, father, and a small girl of about 5 with fever-bright eyes and the labored breathing that Clara recognized on sight. She brought them into the kitchen, sat the child on Ada's table, opened her pouch, and went to work. The parents watched her with the particular combination of desperation and careful hope that Clara had seen on every face that had ever brought her a sick child, wanting to believe, afraid to holding both things at once, because that was the only way to survive the waiting. "She's going to need consistent care," Clara told them halfway through her examination. "This isn't going to be a single treatment. Can you come back every other day for the next 2 weeks?" The mother looked at the father. Some silent calculation passed between them, the distance, the time away from the farm, the cost of it. "We'll come," the father said. "Good," Clara said. "Then let's get started." She worked for an hour. The child was sleeping real sleep, not fever sleep, by the time the Harmons left, with instructions written on the back of a piece of wrapping paper, in Clara's clear, steady hand. The mother stopped at the door and turned back, and looked at Clara with an expression that had no words in it, just the fullness of a woman who has been very afraid and is less afraid now, and she pressed Clara's hand once and then walked out. Clara stood in the kitchen and heard the wagon leave and looked at her own hands. Pete Greer appeared in the kitchen doorway. "There's 2 more," he said. "Waiting at the gate. Heard the Harmon wagon when it passed their place." Clara looked at him, then at Ada. Ada was already putting water on to heat. "Send them in," Clara said. That evening, when the last of the visitors had gone, and the kitchen was quiet, and Clara was sitting at Ada's table with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she'd had no time to drink while it was hot, she heard boots on the kitchen floor and looked up. Nate set a small package on the table beside her cup, brown paper and twine. "What is this?" she said. "Horehound," he said. "From Delwood. I rode in this afternoon while you were working. Didn't want to wait on the drive tomorrow." Clara looked at the package, then at him. He had ridden to Delwood and back 2 hours at least in the afternoon heat while she was seeing patients in the kitchen, so that she would not run out of what she needed. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. "You should have told me. I'd have made you a list of other things." "I got a list from Ada," he said. "The rest is in the storage room." Clara stared at him. A very small, very real thing moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but close. The expression of a man who has done something that pleased him and is somewhat embarrassed about being caught at it. "You talk to Ada," Clara said. "Ada is a useful woman." Ada, Clara said clearly toward the back of the kitchen, told him exactly what to get. "Ada is cooking," Ada said from where she demonstrably was not cooking anything. Clara looked back at Nate. He was still standing at the table, the slight warmth in his expression not quite gone. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome," he said. He didn't leave right away. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, which he had not done before, sat in the kitchen, as if he simply wanted to be in the same room without a reason attached to it. He looked at the table. She looked at her coffee. The silence was easy, in a way that silence between them had not been before. Not the careful, managed silence of two people deciding what to say next, but the resting silence of two people who have nothing they need to hide. "How many people today?" he said. "7, she said. 3 with the lung fever, 2 with infected wounds, 1 with a fever that broke on its own, while the mother was telling me about it, and a man who walked 4 miles with a broken finger and didn't want Belle to know about it because he owes Belle money." Nate's mouth moved. This time, it was a smile, brief and real. "What did you do for the finger?" "Said it," she said. He didn't enjoy that part. "I imagine not." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you tired?" "Thoroughly," she said. "Then drink your coffee and go to your room," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be the same or busier." She looked at him. "You're not concerned about that. The volume of it. I'm concerned about a great many things," he said evenly. "That particular one doesn't make the list." He leaned back in the chair. "Clara, people came here today because you are here. They didn't come to Red Mesa Ranch. They came to you." He held her gaze. "I'm not going to apologize for having you here." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee, cold now, but she drank it anyway. Outside, the summer night was doing what August nights in Texas did, holding the day's heat long after dark, releasing it slowly, reluctantly, as if even the air had gotten attached to something it knew it couldn't keep. But the stars were very clear, and the wind from the north was starting to carry something in it that might, in another month, become the first breath of a different season. Clara finished her coffee and stood up and said good night. Nate said it back, his voice easy and low, and she walked down the hall to the east room with the key in her hand, and she stood for a moment outside the door and pressed her palm flat against the wood. She had walked 40 miles in broken boots, looking for something solid to stand on. She had found something she hadn't been looking for, which was how the real things tended to arrive, not when you went searching, but when you stopped running and let the ground settle beneath you. She unlocked the door and went inside, and for the first time since Harrow Creek, the room she walked into felt less like somewhere she had been permitted to stay, and more like somewhere she had earned the right to be. The herb house was finished on a Friday. Luis and Pete built it in 4 days, working in the early mornings before the heat made timber work miserable, and when they were done, it was a small room, plain and solid, with an east-facing window exactly where Clara had said, and a workbench along the south wall, and 2 rows of iron hooks above it for drying. It smelled like fresh-cut cedar, and possibility, which Clara thought was a combination she would remember for a long time. She stood in the doorway the morning it was done and looked at it without saying anything for a moment. Pete Greer stood behind her with his thumbs in his belt and the slightly proud expression of a man who has built something good and knows it. "Window's true," he said. "I checked it twice." "It's perfect," Clara said. "It's functional," he said, because Pete Greer was not a man who accepted the word perfect when functional would do. But she heard the pride in it anyway. She moved in that same morning. Her pouch, her dried stock, the small collection of jars and cloth packets she had accumulated over 6 weeks of work. It all fit on the workbench with room left over, which told her clearly how much she still needed and how much work there was still to do. She stood at the east window and looked out at the kitchen garden and the flat land beyond it and felt something so unfamiliar it took her a moment to name it. She felt permanent, not safe permanent. Those were different things. Permanent meant she had roots in this ground, not just feet on it. Permanent meant that the east window and the iron hooks and the cedar smell were hers in a way that no one had offered her, and no one could easily take back. She pressed her hand against the window frame and let herself feel it fully without the 60-second limit. She was still standing there when Grace appeared in the doorway, with her cloth doll under one arm and her natural history book under the other, and surveyed the room with the critical eye of someone who had opinions. "It needs something on the wall," Grace said. "What kind of something?" "Something that makes it look like yours," Grace said. Not just a workroom. Yours. Clara looked at the bare cedar wall. I'll think about it. Grace came inside and sat on the floor cross-legged with her book open across her knees and began to read, which was apparently her way of indicating that the herb house had been approved, and she intended to spend time in it. Her breathing was still slightly audible, but the shallow, careful quality was gone. She breathed like a child now, not like someone managing a negotiation with her own lungs. Clara went back to the workbench and started sorting, and the quiet between them was the particular quiet of two people who are comfortable enough together that silence doesn't need to be filled. After a while, Grace said without looking up from her book, "Papa was up early this morning." "Was he?" Clara said. "He walked the fence line at sunrise." She turned a page. "He does that when he's thinking." "What does he usually think about when he walks the fence line?" Grace looked up at her. The look was utterly direct. "You?" she said, and went back to her book. Clara kept sorting herbs and said nothing, and was very careful about her expression for the next few minutes. The morning that changed things again started ordinarily enough. Clara had 4 people waiting at the kitchen, by 8 o'clock the Harmon girl for her follow-up. A ranch hand from the neighboring Prescott property with a chest infection. A woman from town named Dorothea Wells, who had heard from someone who had heard from someone else, and an old man named Clem, who walked 3 miles with a cough he'd had since spring, and who, when Clara examined him, made her go very still inside, in the way she went still when something serious was presenting itself. She sent the others to wait with Ada and sat with Clem alone in the kitchen. "How long has it been producing?" she asked. She meant the cough. "Since March," he said. "Maybe February." "Does it wake you at night?" "Most nights." "Any blood?" He hesitated. "Some." Clara kept her face calm and professional. Internally, she was moving through a rapid accounting of what she had, what she didn't have, and what this man needed that was beyond the range of her pouch and her workbench. "Clem," she said, "I'm going to be honest with you." "That's why I came here instead of Belle," he said dryly. "What you have, I can make more comfortable," she said. "There are herbs that will help with the worst of the coughing and with the night sweats I'm guessing you have and haven't mentioned. I can help you breathe easier and sleep better." She held his gaze. "But I can't cure this. Nobody can cure this with what I have. You need a physician who knows lung disease beyond what Amos Bell knows, and you need to see one in the next few weeks, not the next few months." Clem looked at his hands. He was a man in his late 60s, lean and dry, the way men get who have spent their whole lives outdoors, and he had the face of someone who has been waiting to hear something true and has been both dreading it and relieved by it. "How long?" he said. "I don't know," she said. "Honestly, I don't know. The specialist in San Antonio would tell you more than I can." "San Antonio," he said, like a man calculating what that trip would cost. "I can write you a letter," Clara said, "for the physician there, describing what I've observed. It might help them see you sooner." She paused. "And I can prepare something to help you with the journey. The cough is worse in dry air. I can give you something to keep it managed." Clem was quiet for a moment. "You're not going to tell me it might be nothing," he said. "No," she said. "Belle told me it might be nothing," he said. 3 times. Clara said nothing to that. She reached into her pouch and began preparing the packets he would need, and while her hands worked, her mind was already composing the letter, choosing the words that would make a physician in San Antonio take an old man seriously. She did not hear Nate come in until he was standing in the kitchen doorway. She did not know how long he had been there, or how much he had heard, but when she looked up, his face told her it was enough. He waited until Clem left with his packets and his letter folded in his breast pocket, and her handshake at the door, a real one, both hands, and then he came fully into the kitchen. "You told him the truth," Nate said. "He came here for the truth," Clara said. "Belle told him it might be nothing, 3 times. I heard Clem say that." Nate was quiet for a moment. He looked at the door Clem had just gone through. "What Belle did with that man," he said slowly, "is the same thing he did with Grace. Told him what was easiest instead of what was real." He looked at Clara. How many people in this county have been told what was easiest? It was not really a question. Clara could see him working through it, the weight of what that number might be, the specific shape of what it meant in a small county where one man held most of the medical authority, and had held it apparently with fear as much as knowledge. That's why this matters, Clara said, not pushing, just naming it. He looked at her steadily. I know that, he said. I knew it before today. I just needed to stand in the room where it was that specific and that real. Clara nodded. She picked up the next patient's supplies and went back to work. Margaret Alcott came on a Wednesday. She came without Ruth Henshaw and without a covered dish, which told Clara immediately that this was not a social call performing itself as concern. She came alone, and she came to the herb house door, directly not the kitchen, which meant she had asked someone where to find Clara specifically, which meant she had made a decision before she arrived. Clara was drying a new batch of yarrow on the workbench hooks when the knock came. Come in, she said. Margaret Alcott stood in the doorway of the herb house with her hands folded in front of her, and her quick eyes moving around the room in a way that might have been assessment, or might have been nerves. In the daylight, without the social armor of a covered dish and a companion, she looked less like a woman who collected other people's information and more like a woman who used it to feel safe in a world that didn't offer much safety to women who couldn't afford otherwise. Clara recognized that. She did not say so. Mrs. Whitaker, Margaret said. Mrs. Alcott, Clara said. A pause. Margaret looked at the dried herbs. My husband has pain in his hands, she said. In the mornings. He can't open the store for an hour after he wakes because his fingers won't close properly. He's had it for 2 years. She looked at Clara. Belle gives him tonic that doesn't help. Clara set down the yarrow. Does it come with swelling the pain? Some, mostly in the cold. Does he have trouble with his feet as well? Stiffness in the morning generally? Margaret blinked. Yes, how did you? It's the same complaint, Clara said. Same root. His joints are inflaming. It's worse in cold and damp, gets better through the day as he moves. She reached for the workbench. Willow bark tea every morning. I know it tastes like medicine. Tell him to put honey in it. Warm compresses before he tries to use his hands. And I have a salve made from comfrey and pine resin that will help with the swelling if he uses it consistently. Margaret stood very still. That's more than Belle has said to me in 2 years of visits, she said. Belle's tonic is probably laudanum-based, Clara said evenly. It blunts pain. It doesn't address what's causing it. Margaret was quiet. Then, I said things about you, she said. In town. In this house. I said things that weren't. I said things without knowing you. Yes, Clara said. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. I wouldn't respect you if you did, Clara said. Something shifted in Margaret Alcott's face. The quick eyes settled, and beneath the settled look was a woman who had been sharp from necessity for so long she had nearly forgotten what it felt like to be in a room where the other person was not a threat. What do I owe you? Margaret said. Come back and tell me if the salve helps, Clara said. That's enough. She prepared what Margaret needed and sent her out with it and stood in the herb house doorway and watched her cross the yard and go back through the gate and thought about how the same fear that made people dangerous also made them reachable, if you were patient enough and honest enough and willing to wait. She was still standing there when she heard Grace call her name from the direction of the creek. Grace was running when Clara reached her, which immediately told Clara something was wrong, because Grace did not run, her lungs still didn't allow it freely. She was running anyway toward Clara, her face bright and her breath coming fast, but not the wrong kind of fast, the excited kind. She stopped 3 feet from Clara and bent over her knees for a second, and then straightened and held out her hand. In her palm was a stem of yellow flowers. Yarrow, Grace said. I found it growing by the East Bend, a whole patch of it. I remembered what you said grows in dry places and still blooms yellow. Clara looked at the stem, then at Grace. You found it yourself. I knew what to look for, Grace said. You described it. She was still breathing fast, but her color was good, and the pride coming off her was the pure, uncomplicated kind that belongs to a person who has done something real with knowledge they worked to obtain. Clara took the stem and turned it in her fingers. Perfect yarrow, dry ground, blooming exactly right. "Good eyes," Clara said. "Can we go get the rest?" Grace said. "I can show you where the patch is." "After you've caught your breath," Clara said. Grace straightened fully and put her hands on her hips, with the slight impatience of someone who has been managing their own limitations for long enough to find them mildly annoying rather than frightening. "I'm fine," she said. "I know you are," Clara said. "I said after you've caught your breath, not after you've stopped breathing." Grace gave her a look that was entirely her father's, the particular expression of a person receiving a reasonable correction they are not fully ready to concede. Then she exhaled once deliberately and said, "I've caught my breath." Clara looked at her for a moment. Then she held out her hand. "Show me the patch." Grace took her hand and led her toward the creek, and the morning moved around them, and something in Clara's chest was so full it almost hurt, which she decided was the right kind of hurt, and did not try to manage. Nate found her that evening. She was in the herb house at the workbench processing the yarrow Grace had found, which had turned out to be a substantial patch enough to keep her supplied through autumn if she was careful with it. The light through the east window was going amber and long, the day's heat finally thinning at the edges. He knocked on the open door, which she had come to understand was his way of announcing himself without needing to be let in. She said, "Come in," without looking up. He came and stood near the workbench, not in her way, just present, and she could feel him working up to something the way you can feel weather changing without seeing it directly. She kept working and let him find his way. "Grace told me about the yarrow patch," he said. "She found it herself," Clara said. "She knew what to look for." "She knew because you taught her." "She knew because she paid attention," Clara said. "Those are different things. I've taught plenty of people things they didn't pay attention to." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "She wants to learn more. She told me at supper. She said she wants to know all of them, the names, what they do, how to prepare them." He paused. "She said she wants to be like you." Clara stopped working. She put down the yarrow stem and looked at the workbench and let those words settle through her, the way water settles through dry ground, slowly reaching places that had been thirsty for a long time, without knowing it exactly. "She said that," Clara said. "She said that." Nate confirmed. Clara turned around. He was standing closer than she expected, which meant either he had moved or she had stopped noticing distance between them the way she used to, and she wasn't sure when that had happened or whether it mattered. He had his hat in his hands. Both hands, she noticed. The way Caleb held his when something important was being said. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want to ask it directly without dressing it up, because I've spent enough time in this life saying things sideways." Clara looked at him. "Then ask it." He looked at her with the pale gray-green eyes that the Texas sun had been working on for 40 years, and in them was everything he had not said, across 6 weeks of careful managed distance. The morning coffee without being asked, the lamp held steady all night. The ride to Delwood in the afternoon heat, the herb house with the east window, the word permanent in everything he did, and the word afraid underneath all of it. "Stay," he said. "Not because Grace needs you. Not because the county needs you. Not because this ranch runs better with you in it, though all of those things are true." He stopped. "Stay because I don't want to walk the fence line at sunrise thinking about a person who isn't there. Stay because the kitchen in the morning is a different room when you're in it. Stay because I have been trying to find a reason to ask you this for 3 weeks, and I cannot find a single reason not to that holds up against the truth." Clara held his gaze. "The truth," she said. "That I love you," he said. Flat and honest, the way he said everything that mattered. "I love you, Clara Whitaker. I love how you think and how you work, and how you told me I was wrong, and were right, and stayed anyway. I love that you told my daughter the truth about Yarrow, and that you're the reason she's breathing, and that you never once asked me to thank you for it." He held her gaze. "I am not a simple man, and this is not a simple offer. This ranch is hard, and this county is small, and I spent 3 years being afraid of exactly this moment, and I am still afraid of it right now." He did not look away. "But I am more afraid of watching you leave." The amber light came through the east window, and the cedar smelled like the first day, and somewhere out in the yard, Luis was talking to Pete about something they both found funny, their voices carrying easy and distant. And Clara stood in the herb house she had been given as recognition by a man who had taken the long way around to knowing his own mind, but had gotten there with all of it intact. She thought about 40 miles of Texas hardpan in broken boots. She thought about 60 seconds behind a church in Harrow Creek. She thought about a gate and a cold first exchange and a child on a porch whose shallow breathing she had heard before anyone else did. She thought about a lamp held steady through the longest night. "You are not a simple man," she said. "No," he said. "And I am not a simple woman." "I know that," he said. "I knew it at the gate." "If I stay," she said, "it is on my terms as well as yours. My work continues. The herb house is mine. The people who come here for help are seen regardless of whether they can pay. That is not negotiable." "None of that was ever going to be negotiated," he said. "And if you go sideways on me again," she said, and her voice was steady and serious, "the way you went sideways in August, if you choose the easier thing over the true thing, because the county has opinions, I need to know you understand what that costs." "I understand what it costs," he said. "I paid it. I won't pay it again." She looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that he did not try to fill the silence, which told her something about how much he had learned. "Yes," she said. He went very still. "Yes. Yes," she said again. "I'll stay." He did not reach for her immediately. He stood there for a moment with the words settling around him the way a man stands in rain after a drought, not moving, just letting it be real. Then he stepped forward, and she did not step back, and his hand came up to her face, careful and absolutely certain, and he said her name once, just her name, and she understood that in his mouth it had become a complete sentence. The weeks that followed wrote themselves into the fabric of Red Mesa Ranch, the way seasons write themselves, not with drama, but with accumulation. September came, and the heat finally broke its long hold on the county. And the mornings turned cool enough that the steam sessions for Grace became something she did not need every day, then every few days, then only when the weather shifted fast. Her lungs were not cured. They would always need watching, always need the care that Clara had built into the daily rhythm of the ranch. But they were managed. They were understood. And Grace Calloway, who had spent 7 years breathing carefully so nobody would worry, was learning to breathe like a child who expected to be around for a long time. She spent her afternoons in the herb house. She learned the names with the same focused seriousness she brought to everything, drilling them, the way other children drilled spelling whorehound. Yarrow plantain willow thyme, comfrey pine resin, eucalyptus. And she learned what each did, and when, and how much, and why. And she asked questions that sometimes surprised Clara, and occasionally stumped her, and those were Clara's favorite questions. "If yarrow grows in dry places," Grace said one afternoon, "does that mean it knows how to survive being thirsty?" Clara thought about that. "I think that's exactly what it means," she said. Grace wrote it in her notebook, the one she had started keeping half plant observations and half maps of places she intended to go when she was bigger and her lungs were reliable. She wrote it at the top of the yarrow page grows in dry places because it knows how to survive being thirsty. Caleb brought seeds from town one Saturday without announcing why, just set a paper packet on the herb house workbench and said they were from the feed merchant, and that apparently certain medicinal plants could be cultivated rather than foraged if you had a mind to try. He said it to the workbench rather than to Clara directly, which was his way. And Clara said she did have a mind to try, and they left it at that. Tommy Doyle's wife wrote a letter, not to Nate, to Clara. It was 3 pages long, and it covered the yarrow tea she had started giving the children, and the willow bark she had found by the river, and 2 questions about a persistent fever in the youngest that Clara answered in a return letter the same evening. The correspondence continued back and forth month by month and became one of the things Clara valued most about her days. A woman in San Antonio she had never met, learning plant medicine through letters, teaching her own children to know the names of things that grew near water. The people came. They kept coming quietly, steadily, the way water finds the low ground without being directed to it. The Harmon girl recovered fully and brought her mother, who brought a neighbor, who told a woman at church, and the woman at church told 2 more. They came with fevers and wounds and lungs that weren't right, and grief that had settled in the body the way grief does, disguising itself as physical complaint, because the body and the heart do not keep strictly separate accounts. Clara saw them all. She learned which ones needed what she had and which ones needed to be sent somewhere she could not go. She was not proud about the distinction. She made it clearly every time because she had learned from her mother and from every year since that the most important thing a healer knows is the edges of what she can heal. Dr. Bell's formal practice did not collapse. He continued in Delwood, seeing the patients who came to him, charging his fees. But something had shifted in the county's understanding of what medicine was and who could provide it. The way understandings shift when evidence accumulates past the point where a single authority can contain it. People began to make choices. Some still went to Bell, some came to Clara. Some went to both and compared what they were told, which Clara considered the most sensible approach of all. Bell did not speak to her. She did not require him to. On the last warm evening of October, Nate asked her to walk the fence line with him. She had not done it before. That was his thing, his private accounting of the ranch's edges. But he asked and she went, and they walked the south line in the cooling air, with the light going pink and thin along the horizon, and the cattle moving slow in the far pasture. He was quiet for a while. She had stopped needing to fill his silences weeks ago. "Grace wants to go to Santa Fe," he said. "I know," Clara said. "She's had it on her map for months." "In the spring," he said, "when the weather's good for her lungs." He looked at the fence line. "I thought we might all go." Clara looked at him. "All 3 of us," he said. If you want." She thought about a 7-year-old drawing maps of places she'd only been in her head. She thought about New Orleans, which she had described to Grace in the spring, and which Grace had immediately drawn a map of from the description alone. "She'll want to stop everywhere," Clara said. "I know," Nate said. "It'll take twice as long as it should." "I know that too." "And she'll ask questions about every plant she sees along the road." "Obviously," he said, and there was a warmth in the word that had nothing to do with the temperature. Clara looked at the pink horizon. "Then yes," she said, "I want to." He nodded once, and she felt his hand find hers in the fading light. Not a gesture, not a statement, just a hand finding the hand it had been looking for, and holding it with the particular steadiness of a man who does not let go of things he has decided to keep. They walked the rest of the fence line like that, quiet and present, the ranch settling around them in the particular way of a thing that knows it is home. Nouch. In the county of Delwood, in the burning summer of 1874, a widow woman walked 40 miles on a broken boot to knock on a stranger's gate. She came with a pouch of plants and a spine that would not bend, and knowledge that no title had given her and no title could take away. She came to a man who was afraid of exactly the kind of trust she was asking for, and she made him earn the right to give it, and she waited until he did. She came to a child whose lungs nobody had properly listened to, and she listened, and the child breathed easier, and in breathing easier, the child discovered that the world was larger and more worth knowing than she had previously been allowed to believe. Clara Whitaker did not save Red Mesa Ranch because she was magic. She saved it because she was real, the realest thing that had walked through that iron gate in years, and real on that dry, hard land where most things dried and hardened and stopped feeling was the rarest thing of all. She did not arrive as a guest. She did not leave as a charity case. She stayed as a woman who had built something from the ground up with her own hands and her own mind and her own refusal to accept that worth is something other people assign you. And on Red Mesa Ranch in the county of Delwood in the state of Texas, in the last warm light of an October evening, with the fence line holding, and the cattle settled, and a child's map of Santa Fe tacked to the wall of an herb house that smelled like cedar and yarrow, that was enough. That was everything.